Chapter 8:13. Endure. In reality, the fifth dimension was enduring the plain-dressed woman. If not for the plain-dressed woman, the experts of the fifth dimension would have already obtained the world prison pagoda. Although they could not come to the fourth dimension, they could still use some special methods to do so. Of course, their strength would be greatly reduced. Moreover, it would be extremely dangerous because they would have to face all kinds of restrictions. However, for the world prison pagoda, all the risks were worth it. However, what they did not expect was that they would encounter a huge problem. The plain-dressed woman. This woman had forcibly suppressed them. Being suppressed by someone from the fourth dimension was undoubtedly a great humiliation to the experts of the fifth dimension. Of course, they did not dare to look down on this plain-dressed woman. This was because she was truly powerful. In the battlefield, the plain-dressed woman looked at the middle-aged man without saying anything. The middle-aged man's body was somewhat illusory. It did not seem like a corpse, but it was not completely illusory either. It gave off a feeling of being both real and illusory. The middle-aged man stared at the plain-dressed woman. I have to say, although the fourth dimension is weak, you are very powerful. Powerful to the point of surpassing our expectations. The plain-dressed woman suddenly said, "Do you know why you are not dead yet?" The middle-aged man smiled. Why? The plain-dressed woman looked at the middle-aged man. Because you do not know that you are already dead. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes. Just as he was about to speak, his expression suddenly changed. This was because a sword mark had appeared on his throat. In an instant, the middle-aged man's body became illusory. However, he did not disappear. Within his body, countless red threads tightly wrapped around him. It was these threads that protected his life. The middle-aged man looked at the plain-dressed woman. My body is in the fifth dimension. How can you kill me? Unless your sword can surpass time and space. After saying this, the red threads on his body suddenly exploded. Bang! The middle-aged man rapidly retreated. As he retreated, he looked at the plain-dressed woman in shock. You! Impossible, impossible. Gradually, the middle-aged man completely disappeared. The plain-dressed woman raised her head and looked at the spatial passage behind the middle-aged man. Spending so much money to send such a weakling over. Who are you looking down on? After saying this, she suddenly slashed out with her sword. Chi! A wisp of sword light directly entered the spatial tunnel. This wisp of sword light directly passed through layers of space. It shuttled through, and everywhere it passed, it tore inch by inch, straight towards the fifth dimension. When the sword light reached a certain place, a pitch-black hand suddenly blocked the sword light. Boom! The pitch-black hand trembled violently and retreated explosively while the strand of sword light was nailed firmly to the center of its palm. Just like that, after retreating for over 100 kilometers, the black hand rumbled and exploded into pieces while the strand of sword light remained completely unharmed. The sword light kept moving forward. Soon, a spear suddenly tore through the air and slashed at the sword light. The spear exuded an extremely ancient aura. The tip of the spear flickered with a hint of scarlet light. The powerful energy contained within the spear seemed to be able to destroy the entire universe. It was extremely terrifying. Boom! Following the sound of an explosion, the powerful spear directly exploded and turned into ashes. As for the sword light, it shuttled back and forth. At this moment, it had already entered a strange space. Along the way, it cut through everything like a hot knife through butter. There was no power that could stop it. And when the sword light arrived in front of a rune barrier, the spatial barrier between the fourth and fifth dimensions. It was precisely this barrier that prevented fourth dimension experts from entering the fifth dimension, and it also prevented fifth dimension experts from entering the fourth dimension. When the sword light arrived, the rune barrier suddenly trembled slightly. Then, a white stop character suddenly flew out and imprinted itself on the sword light. Boom! The sword light stopped. After a moment of silence, the sword light suddenly trembled violently. Boom! The sword light and the stop character exploded together. In the starry sky, the plain-dressed woman was expressionless. In fact, the barrier could not stop her, but it could restrain her. Once she was restrained, Yi Xian would be in danger. The current Yi Xian was not strong enough to protect himself. After a moment, the plain-dressed woman retracted her gaze and looked into the depths of the starry sky. Her gaze passed through countless star fields. A bunch of useless people. After saying that, she directly turned around and left. Not long after, she completely disappeared into the end of the starry sky. After the plain-dressed woman disappeared, a sigh suddenly rang out. There was a strong sense of helplessness in the voice. This time, the fifth dimension did not hesitate to let someone use this special method to come to the fourth dimension. They wanted to see if they could deal with the plain-dressed woman. Unfortunately, they had seriously underestimated the strength of the plain-dressed woman. In the beginning, they had simply believed that the woman in the plain dress was the strongest expert in the fourth dimension. However, at this moment, they suddenly realized that the strength of the woman in the plain dress was at the peak of the fifth dimension, let alone the fourth dimension. At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out. You can only restrain her, you can't face her head on. The voice seemed to be right in front of them, but it also seemed to be very far away. After a moment, the scene returned to normal. At this moment, the plain-dressed woman had already arrived in another part of the starry sky. In the boundless starry sky, the plain-dressed woman slowly walked. Her left hand was holding a strand of her beautiful hair. Her beautiful hair was gently twirling around her fingertips. She seemed to be thinking of something, and the corners of her mouth would curl up from time to time. At this moment, she was a little happy. When people lived, they needed to be tied down and worried about something. Only then would there be meaning in living. There was not only the way of the sword, not only longevity, but also him. After an unknown amount of time, the plain-dressed woman arrived in front of a spatial black hole. Within the spatial black hole, there was a powerful force that was constantly devouring her. The plain-dressed woman glanced at the black hole and was about to leave. But at this moment, a voice suddenly rang out from the pitch-black hole. You're so strong. The plain-dressed woman stopped and raised her eyebrows. How strong? The voice asked in reply, how strong? The corners of the plain-dressed woman's mouth curled up slightly. I don't know. The voice fell silent. The plain-dressed woman turned to leave. At this moment, the voice spoke again. You should go to the legendary fifth dimension, the plain-dressed woman said. Without him in the fifth dimension, what's the point of going there? The place where he is my heaven. As soon as she finished speaking, she had already disappeared at the end of the galaxy. In the field, a sigh rang out. Those who can go don't go, and those who want to go can't go. What a sin. In the dual realm sky. At this moment, the dual realm sky was abnormally quiet. After Jiang Qi from the sword sect left, no swordsman came to the dual realm sky again. Therefore, the dual realm sky was very peaceful. However, the experts in the dual realm sky knew that this was the calm before the storm. Would the sword sect let this matter rest? No. In front of the bamboo house, Yi Xian did not leave during this period of time. He had been following Qin Shi. In the courtyard, Yi Xian sat cross-legged on the ground. He was madly devouring swords. Rushing to the peak. Above the unknown realm was the creation realm, and above the creation realm was Earth Immortal. Above the Earth Immortal was the Fate realm. After the Fate realm was Fate Breaking, Seeking Tao, Entering Tao, Breaking Tao, and the legendary Tao Destruction. At present, the Tao Destruction realm might be the highest realm in the fourth dimension. As for the Tao Destruction realm, maybe it existed, maybe it didn't. In any case, regardless of whether it existed or not, what he needed to do now was to reach the Fate-Breaking realm. No, it would be best if he reached the Seeking Tao or Entering Tao. Qin Shi was not far away from Yi Xian. He was also a little surprised that Yi Xian did not leave. Yi Xian completely treated this place as his own home. During this period of time, he had been observing Yi Xian. He also wanted to know whether the treasure was in Yi Xian's hands. If it was really in Yi Xian's hands, it would mean that Yi Xian was sowing discord between the dual realm sky and the sword sect. When that happened, Yi Xian would definitely die. However, after interacting with him for a few days, he felt that the treasure might really not be in Yi Xian's hands. If it was really in Yi Xian's hands, Yi Xian would definitely not dare to stay in front of him. After a while, Chen Shi withdrew his gaze. At this moment, Li He suddenly appeared in front of him. Li He said solemnly, "The sword sect might be making a big move." Chen Shi nodded slightly. "How many people are coming?" Li He shook his head. "I don't know for now." Li He looked at Chen Shi, who said solemnly, "I can't find anything. I only know that the swordsman is rushing towards our dual realm sky." After a moment of silence, Chen Shi said, "Let our people prepare." Li He said, "Are we really going to fight to the death with the sword sect?" Chen Shi said softly, "This matter will not end after we kill the sword sect's people." Li He said, "Is the fifth dimensional treasure in the hands of the sword sect?" Now, the experts of the dual realm sky were not most concerned about the sword sect, but the fifth dimensional treasure. Was the fifth dimensional treasure in the sword sect? No one could be sure. Meanwhile, the sword sect was also wondering whether the fifth dimensional treasure was in the hands of the experts of the dual realm sky. Of course, this was not important now. The main problem now was that several swordsman experts of the sword sect had fallen in the dual realm sky. If the sword sect did not act, the prestige the sword sect had built up over countless years would be gone. Chen Shi suddenly looked at Yi Xian, who was still cultivating not far away. "Little friend Yi, the people of the sword sect are about to arrive. What do you think?" Yi Xian opened his eyes and looked at Chen Shi. After a moment of silence, he said, "Then I'll run." Li He's mouth twitched. "Little friend Yi, why are you afraid of them?" Yi Xian sighed softly. "I'm alone. How can I fight against the sword sect? In fact, I'm not afraid of death. What I'm afraid of is being made a scapegoat. The sword sect has always emphasized that the fifth dimensional treasure is still with me." "How vicious." Chen Shi nodded. "Indeed vicious. Little friend, it's more dangerous for you to go somewhere else. Why don't you join us to fight against the sword sect?" Yi Xian wanted to say something but hesitated. Chen Shi asked, "What?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "My strength is low. I'm afraid I won't be of much help. I'm not trying to decline. I'm just an unknown realm cultivator. Even if I have 2 external objects, my combat power is still limited." As he spoke up to hear, he looked at Chen Shi. "Seniors, Junior has a request." Chen Shi glanced at Yi Xian. "What is it?" Yi Xian said in a deep voice. "I'm currently in the unknown realm. I'm just a little bit away from the great perfection realm. However, I need 2 good swords. I wonder if the 2 seniors can help this junior. If I break through, I'll definitely live and die with you." Chapter 8:14. Chen Shi and Li He looked at each other in silence. A moment later, Li He sent a voice transmission to Chen Shi. "This person has great potential and is extremely powerful. Why don't we help him and form a good relationship?" Chen Shi nodded. As long as the prison pagoda was not in Yi Xian's hands, there was no conflict between Yi Xian and the dual realm sky. Since there was no irreconcilable conflict, they could make friends because Yi Xian was worthy of their friendship. Li He looked at Yi Xian and pointed with a finger. An ancient black sword landed in front of Yi Xian. "I obtained this sword by chance years ago. However, I'm not a swordsman, so I've never used it. I'll give it to you now." Yi Xian took the ancient sword. Good sword. That was his first thought. He didn't know what rank this sword was, but it definitely wasn't low. Of course, it was definitely weaker than his soul-suppressing sword and executing heaven sword. However, if it was used for devouring, it would be the most suitable. Meanwhile, Qinshi suddenly said, "I'll give you something as well." As soon as he said that, a sword suddenly flew in front of Yi Xian. The sword was more than 4 feet long and was dark blue in color. The tip of the sword was missing a small horn, and the entire sword emitted a faint sword glow as if it wanted to stab someone. Good sword. Yi Xian's eyes lit up. This sword was even better than the one Li He gave him. Yi Xian put away the 2 swords and bowed to the 2. "Thank you, seniors." He paused, then added, "I need to cultivate in seclusion for a while." "It won't be long." Qinshi laughed. "No problem." Yi Xian bowed again, then retreated to the side and began devouring. Qinshi and Qinshi left. Somewhere in the starry sky outside the dual realm sky, an old man suddenly appeared. The old man held a sword in his left hand, and there was another sword hanging from his waist. The old man was slightly thin, and his hair was tied up high. He looked very spirited. This old man was the Sword sect protector elder, Du Jian. In the Sword sect, he could be ranked in the top 5. Behind Du Jian were 7 other people, 6 men and 1 woman. All 6 of them carried swords on their backs, and their gazes were as sharp as blades. There were only 8 of them. And these 8 people were all from the Sword sect Guardian Hall. The so-called Sect Guardian Hall was a sharp sword that the Sword sect used to defend against outsiders. This time, the Sword sect had sent out the Sect Guardian Hall, which meant that they were serious. Du Jian looked in the direction of the dual realm sky. "Someone must be framing our Sword sect, and the most suspicious person is Yi Xian." Behind Du Jian, a male swordsman said in a deep voice, "But that Yi Xian is only an unknown realm," Du Jian said indifferently, "but don't forget that he once surmounted his realm to kill countless people. Moreover, that 5th-dimensional treasure seems to have recognized him as its master. If he cooperates with that 5th-dimensional treasure, then it's extremely likely that he'll be able to silently take it away and shift the blame to my Sword sect because he's a sword cultivator." What Du Zuantang said is correct. At this moment, a voice came from the side. The person who had come was Jiang Qi. Jiang Qi walked to Du Jian's side. "This Yi Xian is not as simple as we think. He is a crafty person. This time, he deliberately brought the 5th-dimensional treasure with him. His goal is to use the experts of the dual realm sky to fight against our Sword sect, and he will reap the benefits from it." At this point, he paused slightly. "But we have no evidence." Du Jian said calmly, "What evidence do you need?" "Our Sword sect sword is the evidence. Let's not talk about Yi Xian first. Since the dual realm sky dared to kill our Sword sect's people, they must pay the price. As for whether they were framed or not, that is no longer important. What is important is that our Sword sect's people are dead." The Sword sect's people were dead. Jiang Qi was silent. He knew that even if there was any misunderstanding between the Sword sect and the dual realm sky, it was already irreparable. The Sword sect's people were dead. Du Jian suddenly said, "Kill." As soon as he said this, the sword at his waist suddenly flew out and slashed at the dual realm sky in the distance. The sword cut through the sky and tore through everything. Just as the sword was about to slash into the dual realm sky, an illusory fist hundreds of meters long suddenly tore through space and arrived in front of the sword. Boom! The sky shook violently. The sword instantly flew back in front of Du Jian, and the illusory fist immediately turned into nothingness. At this moment, Qinshi appeared a short distance away from Du Jian and the others. Behind him were 16 people, all of whom were super experts of the dual realm sky. Even though they were facing the Sword sect, there was not the slightest hint of fear in their eyes. Those who could come to the dual realm sky were very arrogant. Did they need to fear others? In the distance, the Sword sect's Du Jian looked at Qinshi and didn't waste any words. He lightly flicked his left thumb. Buzz! The sound of a sword suddenly rang out. The next moment, a sword light slashed in front of Qinshi. At this moment, a saber had appeared in Chen Shi's hand. He raised the saber and slashed forward. Break! Boom! As the saber slashed down, the sword instantly flew back in front of Du Jian. The sword trembled violently as if it was withstanding an enormous force. A saber cultivator. Du Jian looked at Chen Shi. I'm a little blind. Chen Shi said with a smile, the sword sect hasn't stepped into the secular world for many years. In your eyes, your status is transcendent and you can look down on everything. Unfortunately, you underestimate the dual realm sky. The four-dimensional universe isn't something that your sword sect has the final say in. Du Jian sneered. Is that so? Chen Shi's smile grew wider. You don't believe me? Let's give it a try. Du Jian sneered. Let's give it a try. Kill. As soon as he finished speaking, he was suddenly sent flying. Buzz. The sound of a sword's hum shook the sky. Behind him, Jiang Qi and the others also rushed out. 8 sword lights streaked across the sky, heading straight for Chen Shi and the others. Chen Shi said softly, "Don't be careless." As soon as he finished speaking, he lightly stomped his right foot and swung the long saber in his hand. A wave of saber light slashed out. Rumble. Soon, the entire sky was filled with battles. However, as soon as they started fighting, the dual realm sky's side was directly crushed by the 8 people from the sword sect. Although the sword sect only had 8 people, which was half the number of the dual realm sky's side, the 8 people's battle prowess was somewhat terrifying. Not only were they not at a disadvantage when fighting 1 against 2, they could even suppress them. However, the dual realm sky's experts weren't pushovers. Although they were suppressed, it wouldn't be easy for the sword sect's experts to kill them. On the other side, 2 women were watching the battlefield. They were Zhu Xia and Yuan Xiaodao. Zhu Xia had already ordered all the experts from Deity's Templar to return to Deity's Templar. Deity's Templar would no longer participate in these muddy waters. The situation was too complicated. Yuan Xiaodao suddenly said, "Both sides will suffer." Zhu Xia fell silent. After this battle, both the sword sect and the dual realm sky would suffer great losses. If the sword sect had suppressed the dual realm sky from the start, their losses would definitely be much smaller. However, the problem was that the sword sect didn't have the ability to directly suppress the dual realm sky. The sword sect had underestimated the dual realm sky. Moreover, the dual realm sky's strength was far from this. However, some people also chose to watch and didn't make a move. If the sword sect really wanted to destroy the entire dual realm sky, then these hidden people would definitely make a move. This was because there was a passage to the 5th dimension in the dual realm sky, and this passage had been opened by countless experts of the dual realm sky with their lives. If it was somewhere else, who would be able to open it? Yuan Xiaodao said softly, the sword sect made 2 mistakes. The first mistake was that they shouldn't have targeted everyone in the dual realm sky. The second mistake was that they underestimated the dual realm sky. Zhu Xia suddenly said, "There's another mistake." Yuan Xiaodao looked at Zhu Xia who said softly, "They shouldn't have underestimated the Yi guy." Yi Xian. Yuan Xiaodao was silent. She had interacted with Yi Xian many times, and this swordsman was completely different from other swordsmen. He had many devious thoughts. There was only one way to deal with Yi Xian, and that was to kill him without giving him any chance. Otherwise, there would be endless troubles in the future. Others might not know, but she knew that the treasure was definitely still in Yi Xian's hands. Zhu Xia suddenly said, "How do you think this will end?" Yuan Xiaodao looked not far away. If both sides continued to fight like this, both sides would definitely suffer great losses. This was a loss that neither side could afford. Even if it was the sword sect, if these 9 people died here, it would definitely be a huge blow to the sword sect. But now that it had reached this point, it was impossible to stop. After all, several swordsmen from the sword sect had been killed by the people of the dual realm sky. At this time, Zhu Xia suddenly said, "What do you think that Yi Xian is doing now?" Yuan Xiaodao said indifferently, "He must be secretly laughing right now." Zhu Xia shook his head and smiled. This guy. While the experts of the dual realm sky were fighting with the sword sect, Yi Xian was currently trying to break through to the extreme creation realm. He was very leisurely now, because no one came to disturb him. After he obtained the two swords that Chen Shi and Li He gave him, he started to devour them. After devouring one of the swords, his aura started to rise crazily, and he was getting closer and closer to the extreme creation realm. Just like that, after about 2 hours, Yi Xian devoured another sword. Boom! A powerful aura suddenly swept out from his body, and at the same time, his sword will also vibrated in his body. The aura around him grew stronger and stronger, and after about 2 hours, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. Wang! The sound of a sword suddenly rang out, and in Yi Xian's eyes, 2 rays of sword light flashed like lightning, and the 2 sword wheels around him suddenly swept out in all directions. At this time, Yi Xian suddenly opened his left hand, and the surrounding sword wheels instantly disappeared without a trace. At the same time, in the palm of his left hand, there was an additional black and white sword condensed from sword will. Extreme Creation Realm. Now, after devouring the 2 swords, he had directly reached the Extreme Creation Realm from the unknown realm. Now, he had reached the Extreme Creation Realm, his physical body had reached the Extreme Creation Realm, and his sword Dao attainment had broken through. In his current state, he could even fight against a life-breaking state expert. Because he still had the Executing Heaven sword and the Immortal Slaying sword gourd. If his realm was not enough, he could make up for it with equipment. Yi Xian looked down at the black and white sword in his hand, and the corner of his mouth curled up slightly. Go kill people. As soon as he finished speaking, he disappeared on the spot. P.S. Go vote. Chapter 8:15. Outside the dual world sky. The experts of the dual world sky were still locked in battle with the sword sect. At this moment, some of the experts of the dual world sky had fallen. As for the sword sect, not a single expert had fallen. The dual world sky had fallen into a complete disadvantage. Steady suppression. The swordsman's combat strength really couldn't be compared to ordinary experts in the same realm of cultivation. Even Chen Shi, a peerlessly talented super expert, found it very difficult to deal with the sword sect's Du Jian. Hiss. Suddenly, another bloody head flew into the air. It was an expert from the dual world sky. At this moment, 3 experts from the dual world sky had fallen. Chen Shi's expression gradually turned gloomy. Because he was in a very bad situation right now. Suddenly, a sword howl resounded from afar. Chen Shi swiftly turned his head, and he saw the head of a nearby swordsman from the sword sect fly into the air. Hiss. Blood sprayed out like a fountain. Everyone was stunned. Who killed him? Because they didn't see the culprit after the swordsman was killed. The experts from the sword sect stopped fighting and became vigilant. Du Jian glanced at the surroundings with an icy cold gaze. Who did it? Beside Du Jian, Jiang Qi said in a low voice, "It might be that Yi Xian. That person knows a special sword skill. Once he uses it, he will become invisible and no one will be able to find him." Yi Xian. Du Jian glanced at the surroundings, and it didn't take long for his sword intent to sweep out like a net. However, he still didn't notice Yi Xian. It was as if Yi Xian didn't exist at all. Du Jian's face fell. Is he a swordsman? He's an assassin. On the other hand, Chen Shi heaved a slight sigh of relief. He knew that Yi Xian had made a move. At this moment, he was also a little shocked. Yi Xian could actually kill someone in an instant. Although Yi Xian had launched a sneak attack and caught him off guard, this attack was still very terrifying. It should be noted that the 7 people behind Du Jian were at least experts at the peak of the life realm. Not only that, but they could even fight against experts at the life-breaking realm. However, he was instantly killed by Yi Xian. This strength was not just any ordinary kind of terrifying. Fortunately, Yi Xian was from the dual realm sky. At this moment, a voice suddenly sounded in his mind, "Attack." It was Yi Xian's voice. Qin Shi glanced at the surroundings, and then he suddenly said, "Attack." As soon as he finished speaking, he charged towards Du Jian. He knew that now that Yi Xian was secretly helping them, this was an opportunity for the dual realm sky. As Qin Shi attacked, the two realm sky experts behind him also made their moves. In the distance, Du Jian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Watch out for Yi Xian in the dark." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly drew the sword at his waist. A sword howl shook the sky, and then a ray of sword light tore through the sky and slashed at Qin Shi. Both sides began fighting again. This time, the sword sex experts weren't able to suppress Qin Shi and the others, because they had to divert some of their attention to deal with Yi Xian. After all, Yi Xian was watching them from the dark. Around 2 hours later, a sword howl suddenly resounded. Along with this sword howl, the expression of one of the sword cultivators from the sword sect instantly changed drastically. He swiftly turned around and raised the sword in his hand to block. At this moment, a sword just happened to strike his sword. Hiss! The sword in his hand was instantly slashed into two by Yi Xian's sword. Then, Yi Xian's executing heaven sword slashed down from the top of the swordsman's head. Hiss! The swordsman was instantly sliced into pieces. The swordsman's soul intended to flee, but it didn't take long for a mysterious force to absorb his soul. Soul-suppressing sword. Executing heaven sword targeted the body, while soul-suppressing sword targeted the soul. After the swordsman's soul was absorbed, Yi Xian vanished as if he'd never been there. As soon as the swordsman vanished, the expressions of the remaining experts from the sword sect changed. He was instantly killed again. That was too terrifying. Meanwhile, Du Jian spoke decisively, "Retreat." As soon as he finished speaking, the experts from the sword sect hurriedly retreated explosively. As for Qin Shi, he hesitated for a moment but didn't choose to pursue them in the end. Because the dual world sky had suffered heavy losses as well. If they pursued them, then they would really perish together. It wasn't worth it. Suddenly, Yi Xian appeared by Qin Shi's side. Yi Xian said solemnly, "Let me sense to see if they have the fifth-dimensional treasure." Qin Shi was slightly taken aback, but then he hurriedly nodded. "Okay." Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. He suddenly stretched out his right hand and clenched it. In an instant, the space in front of Du Jian trembled slightly. Then, an illusory Shao Ta appeared in front of him. Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. It's in his hands. Kill him." In the distance, Du Jian was dumbfounded when he saw the prison pagoda suddenly appear. Why did the fifth-dimensional treasure suddenly appear here? Without thinking too much, Du Jian directly grabbed the prison pagoda. "Retreat!" At this moment, Qin Shi suddenly roared, "Stop them!" As soon as he finished speaking, he immediately rushed out. Originally, he didn't want to chase after Du Jian and the others because it wasn't worth it to perish together with them. However, at this moment, it was worth it. Because the fifth-dimensional treasure was on Du Jian. At this moment, Qin Shi and the others were like madmen, madly chasing after Du Jian and the others. As for Yi Xian, he quietly disappeared and hid. In the distance, Zhu Xia solemnly said, "Is the treasure in the sword sect's hands?" Yuan Xiaodao shook his head. If it's really in their hands, then Du Jian wouldn't be so surprised. Moreover, this thing's appearance is really strange. Yi Xian. Zhu Xia solemnly said, "It must be this guy's doing." Yuan Xiaodao softly said, "This guy wants to kill the sword sect." In the distance, Qin Shi and the others were madly running. However, the distance between them and the sword sect was indeed increasing. For experts like Du Jian and the others, if they didn't want to fight, it would be very difficult for others to stop them. Just as the sword sect was about to completely disappear, a powerful pressure suddenly enveloped Du Lin and the others. Another expert from the dual realm sky had made a move. Qin Shi and the others weren't the only ones in the dual realm sky. There were other experts too. Previously, these people didn't make a move because they weren't sure if the treasure was in the sword sect's hands. But now, they were sure. Therefore, they couldn't sit still anymore. Because once Du Jian and the others brought the treasure to the sword sect, it would be as difficult as ascending to heaven to take it back. When that powerful pressure appeared, Du Jian, who was the leader, instantly changed his expression. Du Jian suddenly opened his right hand and the treasure appeared in his palm. Looking at the treasure in his hand, Du Jian's expression was complicated. Fifth dimensional treasure. This was a treasure that could allow people to go to the fifth dimension. After a moment of silence, Du Jian suddenly looked at Jiang Qi beside him. Bring it back to the sword sect. Jiang Qi was about to speak when the world prison pagoda flew in front of him. Du Jian angrily roared, "All of you, go back to the sword sect." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned to look at Qin Shi and the others who had already rushed over and smiled sinisterly. Bring it on. As soon as he finished speaking, the sword in his hand suddenly trembled violently. A moment later, a sword light flew out. The instant Du Jian attacked, Jiang Qi and the others decisively chose to leave. They knew that Du Jian wanted to make Qin Shi and the others stay and buy time for them. Their top priority now was to bring the treasure back to the sword sect. Just as Jiang Qi and the others were about to leave, an old man suddenly appeared in front of them. The old man coldly looked at Jiang Qi and the others. You want to go back? As soon as he finished speaking, he was about to attack when Du Jian suddenly turned into a sword light and slashed at the old man. The old man narrowed his eyes and suddenly punched out. Boom! This punch forced Du Jian to stop in his tracks. At this moment, Qin Shi and the others had already surrounded Jiang Qi and the others. Seeing this, the expressions of Du Jian and the others sank. We can't leave. Meanwhile, Du Jian suddenly sent a voice transmission to the members of the sword sect. The experts of my sword sect will arrive in 15 minutes. We must delay them. Delay them. Du Jian looked at Qin Shi. Let's talk. Qin Shi was about to speak when a voice suddenly resounded in his mind. They're definitely trying to buy time. If I'm not wrong, the experts of the sword sect are already on the way. We must end the battle quickly. It was Yi Xian's voice. Qin Shi immediately looked at Du Jian when he heard Yi Xian. He wants to buy time. Everyone, end the battle quickly. Leave this treasure in the dual world sky for now. As for its future, we'll discuss it later. As soon as he finished speaking, he charged out. Buy time. The experts of the dual world sky recovered from their shock when they heard Qin Shi, and they immediately charged out. They had to deal with Du Jian and the others before the experts of the sword sect arrived. This time, the experts of the dual world sky could be said to be fighting with their lives on the line. Not only that, but even more experts joined the fray. All the experts of the dual world sky knew that if they couldn't stop Du Jian and the others, the fifth-dimensional treasure would really fall into the hands of the sword sect. Once it fell into the hands of the sword sect, they would never be able to obtain it again. They had to leave it in the dual world sky. It was now a battle between the dual world sky and the sword sect. As more and more experts of the dual world sky joined the fray, Du Jian and the other situation worsened. In less than a dozen breaths' time, another expert of the sword sect had fallen. Du Jian, who was in the lead, was besieged by 6 super experts and was already covered in wounds. He couldn't hold on any longer. It wasn't just him. Jiang Qi and the others behind him couldn't hold on any longer. Du Jian scanned his surroundings. He knew that they would all die here before the reinforcements of the sword sect arrived. That was because there were 27 super experts besieging them, and even the weakest among them was a life realm expert. The sword sect had underestimated the dual world sky. This place wasn't as weak as they had imagined. After a moment of silence, Du Jian suddenly pulled out the sword at his waist and stabbed it into his chest. He roared, "Sect Guardian Hall, sacrifice the sword." As soon as he finished speaking, a powerful force suddenly swept out from his body. But almost at the same time, his entire face turned pale like a piece of white paper, without the slightest trace of blood. Sacrifice the sword. Sacrifice the body to the sword. This was the last resort of the swordsman of the sword sect, a method to perish together with his enemies. It wasn't just Du Jian. The swordsman of the sect guardian hall behind him also chose to sacrifice the sword. Seeing this, the expressions of Qin Shi and the others changed drastically. Chapter 8:16. Countless sword lights shot out from Du Jian and the swordsman behind him. In an instant, the sky within a radius of tens of thousands of miles was covered by the sword lights. At the same time, Du Jian's furious roar resounded. Retreat! Upon hearing Du Jian's words, Jiang Qi turned around and left without the slightest hesitation. After that, he turned around and flew away on his sword, disappearing into the distant horizon in the blink of an eye. The experts of the dual realm sky wanted to give chase, but they were blocked by countless sword lights. After Du Jian and the others sacrificed their swords, they were many times stronger than before. Therefore, the experts of the dual realm sky didn't dare to be careless in the face of these sword lights and quickly retreated. In an instant, Jiang Qi and the others had already disappeared into the boundless horizon. After a while, the battlefield returned to normal. By then, Jiang Qi and the others had already disappeared. The expressions of Qin Shi and the others became extremely unsightly when they saw this. They escaped. Jiang Qi had actually escaped. Qin Shi's expression was frighteningly gloomy. Once the fifth-dimensional treasure returned to the sword sect, it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens for them to obtain it again. Although the dual realm sky didn't fear the sword sect, it would be impossible to destroy the sword sect unless all the experts of the dual realm sky joined forces. But even if all the experts of the dual realm sky joined forces, there wasn't much hope of destroying the sword sect. Everyone's expressions were somewhat gloomy. At this moment, Yi Xian appeared beside Qin Shi. He looked into the distant horizon and said softly, "Once the sword sect obtains that treasure, then we..." Everyone's expressions became somewhat unsightly when they heard Yi Xian's words. A fifth-dimensional treasure. If the sword sect obtained that treasure, the consequences would be unimaginable. Qin Shi looked at Yi Xian. "Little friend, this thing isn't just a key to the fifth dimension?" Yi Xian nodded. "Of course. This thing is extremely lethal. If they control it and use it with their strength, it would be very easy for them to destroy the dual realm sky." After a short moment of silence, Qin Shi suddenly said, "All of you should be clearly aware of the situation we're in right now. If we don't join forces, then we'll be utterly unable to resist the sword sect." At that moment, an old man nearby suddenly said, "Contact all the experts in the dual realm sky." Qin Shi nodded. "Senior Elder is right. We must unite all the experts in the dual realm sky." When he spoke up to hear, he seemed to have thought of something, and then he looked at Yi Xian and said, "Young brother, you killed 2 members of the sword sect just now, so they'll definitely not let you off. So, why don't you stay here and resist the sword sect with us?" Everyone in the surroundings looked at Yi Xian when they heard this. Everyone regarded Yi Xian very highly. Because he had just killed 2 experts from the sword sect in an instant. Only with strength would one be respected. Yi Xian thought about it and nodded. "All right." Seeing that Yi Xian had agreed, Qin Shi smiled. "That's great." A short moment later, all of them turned around and left. Yi Xian glanced at the starry sky in the distance, and the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. However, he didn't speak. Jiang Qi was dashing madly with the pagoda at the end of the starry sky. What he wanted to do now was to take this precious treasure of the fifth dimension back to the sword sect. But at that moment, he suddenly stopped. He looked at the spatial ring in his hand and saw that it had suddenly exploded, and the world prison pagoda flew out. Jiang Qi's expression instantly changed. He grabbed the world prison pagoda, and countless sword intents and sword lights enveloped the world prison pagoda. The pagoda trembled violently while the sword intent grew more and more illusory. Jiang Qi was shocked when he witnessed this scene. He knew that the pagoda intended to flee. Jiang Qi was just about to attack again when a mysterious force suddenly surged out from within the pagoda. Bang! The sword intent instantly vanished without a trace. At the same time, Jiang Qi retreated explosively for almost 30 kilometers. When Jiang Qi stopped, the pagoda had vanished. Jiang Qi's mind instantly went blank when he witnessed this scene. Meanwhile, a strand of sword intent suddenly appeared in the distance. In the next moment, the sword intent vanished, and a middle-aged man appeared in front of Jiang Qi. The middle-aged man had shoulder-length hair, sword-like eyebrows, and starry eyes. His hands were hidden in wide sleeves, and he emanated a scholarly aura. Jiang Qi immediately returned to his senses when he saw this middle-aged man, and he bowed slightly. Junior uncle. This person was the sword sex Li Qinfeng. This name wasn't very famous in the fourth dimension, but in the sword sect, he was extremely famous, and he was like a god. Li Qinfeng spoke softly. Did something happen? Jiang Qi nodded, and then he recounted what had just happened. After he finished, he was still slightly nervous because he was afraid that Li Qinfeng wouldn't believe him. Li Qinfeng spoke softly. We were schemed against. Jiang Qi instantly heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this. Li Qinfeng believed him. Jiang Qi spoke in a low voice. This thing's appearance and disappearance are too strange. Who exactly schemed against my sword sect? Li Qinfeng shook his head. Let's not care about this for now. My sword sect has lost so many people this time. Let's settle this debt with them first. After he finished speaking, he transformed into a strand of sword intent and vanished into the horizon. He was heading towards the dual realm sky. Jiang Qi hesitated for a moment, and then he hurriedly followed. The dual realm sky. On this day, a strand of sword intent suddenly streaked across the horizon. This strand of sword intent slashed into the dual realm sky, and everything in its path was obliterated inch by inch. During this period, numerous experts within the dual realm sky hadn't even reacted before they were slashed into pieces by this strand of sword intent. The sword intent was unstoppable. Countless experts within the dual realm sky were shocked. Right at this moment, an enormous hand suddenly stretched out from the space in front of the strand of sword intent. This enormous hand directly grabbed the strand of sword intent. After a moment of silence, boom! The enormous hand suddenly shattered and turned into nothingness, but the strand of sword intent was still there. The strand of sword intent continued to fly as if it wanted to slice the dual realm sky into pieces. This sword was pointed at the dual realm sky. Right at this moment, a skinny old man suddenly appeared in front of this strand of sword intent. The skinny old man looked at this strand of sword intent with a calm expression. When the strand of sword intent arrived in front of him, he suddenly put his fingers together, and black light appeared on his fingertips. This finger directly touched the strand of sword intent. Boom! There was a sudden explosion, and the skinny old man instantly retreated nearly 100,000 feet. However, the strand of sword intent also stopped in its original spot. The sword intent suddenly dissipated, and a middle-aged man appeared in front of the old man. This person was Li Qinfeng. The skinny old man looked at Li Qinfeng, his eyes full of solemnity. Half-step to the mortal realm. Li Qinfeng was expressionless. You aren't too bad yourself. You can take a strike from me. The skinny old man said indifferently, if you want revenge, I'm afraid that's not enough. Li Qinfeng looked at the skinny old man. Want to give it a try? The skinny old man nodded. Give it a try. As soon as he finished speaking, the skinny old man suddenly vanished, and then a strand of black light flashed. At the instant the skinny old man vanished, Li Chenfeng stomped his right foot lightly, and then a strand of sword intent shot out from beneath his feet. Bang! The strand of black light in the distance was directly forced to stop on the spot. At the same time, Li Chenfeng vanished, and the strand of sword intent tore through the air. Rumble. As an explosion resounded through the air, the skinny old man instantly retreated explosively. As he retreated, a strand of sword light instantly arrived at the center of his brows. The skinny old man's pupils constricted abruptly, and then he swiftly pressed his palms together. This time, he directly blocked the sword light. However, the strand of sword intent instantly slashed apart his palms. The skinny old man was horrified in his heart, and his figure flashed to the side. Hiss! The skinny old man's figure flashed away, but his head was left on the spot. The old man's eyes opened wide, and they were filled with disbelief. He knew that this swordsman before him was very strong, but he hadn't imagined that this swordsman would be strong to this extent. The surroundings suddenly fell silent. In the darkness below, Yi Xian glanced at Li Chenfeng, then turned and ran. Soon, he completely disappeared. If he could win, then he would fight. If he couldn't, then he would run. Meanwhile, Li Chenfeng suddenly swept his gaze downwards, and a strand of sword intent spread out like a net towards the surroundings. He seemed to be searching for someone. After a short moment, his brows furrowed slightly, and he turned to look at Jiang Qi. That Yi Xian is still in this world? Jiang Qi said solemnly, he should be. Li Chenfeng nodded slightly. He once again scanned the area with his divine sense, but he still couldn't find Yi Xian. At that moment, Jiang Qi said solemnly, this fellow must have seen that the situation isn't good and fled. Li Chenfeng nodded slightly. It's all right. I'll settle the score with him in the future. After saying that, he looked around. Why? Is there no one else in the dual realm sky? As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his right hand gently. In an instant, countless sword intents flew out and killed anyone they saw. In the dual realm sky, countless powerhouses hurriedly joined forces to resist. However, there were still people who were killed by these sword intents. In the darkness, Yuan Xiaodao, who was beside Zhu Xia, said softly, the sword sect is serious. Zhu Xia said indifferently, we've lost so many people. If we don't come for real, then we'll be stupid. Yuan Xiaodao smiled. This person isn't just an ordinary kind of strong. Zhu Xia looked at Yuan Xiaodao. Do you have a chance of winning? Yuan Xiaodao shook his head. This person's sword Dao attainment has already touched a trace of the mortal realm. I can't match him. Zhu Xia asked, this dual realm sky, Yuan Xiaodao said softly, don't underestimate this place. There are also real big shots here. As soon as Yuan Xiaodao finished speaking, an old man slowly walked over from the distant horizon. As this old man walked over, the sword intents in the dual realm sky suddenly stopped and slowly dissipated. Yuan Xiaodao looked at the old man. He's here. In the air, Li Chenfeng also looked at the old man. The old man wore a simple blue robe and had a slight hunch on his back. He held a walking stick in his hand and walked slowly, coughing from time to time. Li Chenfeng looked at the old man and didn't say anything. The old man looked at Li Chenfeng with a complicated gaze. As expected of the most monstrous person in the sword sect in the past 1,000 years. The most monstrous person in the sword sect in the past 1,000 years. Li Chenfeng smiled. You seem to know me. The old man smiled. Not only do I know you, I also know your master and your senior brother. I wonder if your master, that old fart, is still alive? Li Chenfeng looked at the old man. Who are you? The old man shook his head and smiled. A person who is about to die of old age. P.S. Asking for a ticket. Give me a ticket. Chapter 8:17. A person who was about to die of old age. Everyone was looking at the old man who'd just appeared. Even some people in the dual realm sky were unfamiliar with the elder who had just appeared. Very few people had seen him before. The old man gazed at Li Chenfeng. Although the sword sect is strong, it can't destroy the dual world sky. Even your master and senior brother can't do it. Li Chenfeng smiled. Is that so? The old man nodded. Yes. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly opened his palm and clenched it lightly. At this instant, Li Chenfeng suddenly attacked with his sword. This attack was so swift that many people couldn't react in time. However, the surroundings returned to calm in an instant. At this moment, everyone's expressions became solemn. Because the battle was over. In the distance, Yuan Shaodao's expression was extremely solemn. The old man's strength had exceeded his expectations. Seeking the Tao. Quote, in the distance, Li Chenfeng stared at the old man. A decent one has finally arrived. As soon as he finished speaking, he pressed his fingers together. An ray of sword light suddenly slashed out from the tip of his finger. The ray of sword light was like a thread that was imperceptibly fine. In the distance, the old man suddenly opened his palm and clenched it tightly. Boom! The surrounding space suddenly trembled violently, and a light-shattering sound resounded. In the next moment, the old man retreated explosively for an entire 3 kilometers. Li Chenfeng stood on the spot and didn't move. However, his expression was much more solemn than before. Because his sword had shattered. Both of them had seemed relaxed in that attack just now, but they'd actually used all their strength. He seemed to have the upper hand, but he actually hadn't gained any advantage. In the distance, the old man gazed at Li Chenfeng and said softly, "The younger generation will surpass us in time. Your sword sect is really full of talents." Li Chenfeng said indifferently, "Hand over Yi Xian." Yi Xian. Obviously, he knew that he couldn't destroy the dual world sky with his own strength. Thus, he had to settle for the next best thing and choose Yi Xian. His intuition told him that Yi Xian was the culprit. The old man shook his head. Yi Xian doesn't have much to do with us. If you want him, go find him yourself. He wouldn't hand over Yi Xian because Yi Xian wasn't a pushover. It was already incredible that he was still alive. If the dual realm sky captured him to curry favor with the sword sect, he might be targeted by the people behind Yi Xian. The person behind Yi Xian was also very mysterious. It was still a mystery how strong the other party was. Li Chenfeng looked at the old man. You must hand him over. The old man shook his head and smiled. Threatening the old man? Sure, your sword sect can declare war on us. A wisp of sword light suddenly appeared on Li Chenfeng's fingertip. The old man's expression was calm, without a hint of fear. The two worlds realm was truly not afraid of the sword sect. The wisp of sword light on Li Chenfeng's fingertip grew brighter and the atmosphere became more and more tense. At this moment, an illusory middle-aged man appeared in the air. He wore a green robe and had a sword hanging from his waist. Seeing this person, the wisp of sword light on Li Chenfeng's fingertip quietly disappeared. He bowed slightly to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man in front of him was the sword sect leader, Mu Qingfeng. It wasn't his main body that had come. Mu Qingfeng looked at the old man below and smiled. So it's Grand Elder Chen. I didn't expect you to still be alive. Grand Elder Chen smiled. I'm just struggling at death's door. Mu Qingfeng smiled. I'm here today to demand an explanation. Grand Elder Chen looked at Mu Qingfeng. Your sword sect has already obtained that treasure. Do you still want an explanation? Mu Qingfeng shook his head. My sword sect didn't obtain that treasure. Grand Elder Chen frowned. Are you joking? Mu Qingfeng smiled. I don't like to joke. That treasure really isn't in my sword sect's hands. As he spoke, he looked at the nearby Jiang Qi. Jiang Qi told him about how they had escaped from the World Prison Pagoda. Hearing Jiang Qi's words, the expressions of the dual realm sky powerhouses turned ugly. They obviously didn't believe it. No one would believe it. Mu Qingfeng shook his head and smiled. I don't need you to believe it. Let that Yi Xian come out. I have a way to deal with him. Obviously, they suspected that Yi Xian was behind this. Yi Xian. Down below, Minister Chen was silent for a moment, and then he looked at Qin Shi not far away. Where is Yi Xian? At this moment, he also felt that something was off. Qin Shi shook his head. I don't know. Hearing this, Grand Elder Chen frowned slightly. At this moment, a voice came from the side. Senior, are you looking for me? Everyone looked over and saw that the person was Yi Xian. Yi Xian had appeared. Of course he had to appear because he knew that if he didn't, everyone would suspect him. That would be extremely disadvantageous to him. He couldn't withstand the sword sect and the dual realm sky targeting him. Seeing Yi Xian, Qin Shi nodded slightly. You don't need to worry. As long as that treasure isn't on you, no one can take you away in front of us. Yi Xian said, thank you. Saying this, he looked at Mu Qingfeng in the air and smiled. I wonder why you're looking for me, sir? Mu Qingfeng sized up Yi Xian and nodded slightly. Everyone says that you're the most monstrous swordsman of the younger generation. I have to say that you're really not bad. Yi Xian smiled. Thank you for the compliment. Mu Qingfeng looked at Yi Xian. Everything that happened today was planned by you, right? Yi Xian smiled. Are you talking about the battle between the sword sect and the dual realm sky? Mu Qingfeng nodded. Yes. Yi Xian shook his head and smiled. Senior, you think too highly of me. Mu Qingfeng smiled. The sword sect's biggest mistake was underestimating you. Even a lion needs to go all out against a rabbit. That was my mistake. Yi Xian smiled. Senior, what you're trying to say is that the treasure is in my hands and I'm using it to sow discord between you and the dual realm sky, right? Mu Qingfeng looked at Yi Xian. Isn't that the case? Yi Xian asked in return, where's the proof? Proof. The dual realm sky's powerhouses all looked at Mu Qingfeng. Mu Qingfeng looked at Yi Xian and did not say anything. Yi Xian said with a smile, actually, what I'm thinking is that your sword sect has already obtained that treasure, but all of you refuse to admit it. Not only do you refuse to admit it, you even want to make me, Yi Xian, take the blame. Because all of you don't want the people of the world to stare at all of you. If you make the people of the world focus their gazes on me, then your sword sect will be able to be extremely comfortable, right? Not far away, Grand Elder Chen narrowed his eyes slightly. He felt that what Yi Xian said made sense. In the air, Mu Qingfeng smiled. I have to say, your mouth is very sharp. Unfortunately, I won't reason with you or have any proof. As he spoke, a powerful sword will suddenly crushed toward Yi Xian. Yi Xian did not hesitate and hid behind Grand Elder Chen. Grand Elder Chen looked coldly at Mu Qingfeng. He waved his right hand and a powerful force blocked Mu Qingfeng's sword will. However, it was clearly very strenuous for him, and his face was a little pale. In the air, Mu Qingfeng smiled. Is the dual realm sky going to protect him? Grand Elder Chen looked coldly at Mu Qingfeng. He's a member of the dual realm sky. Mu Qingfeng smiled. Very well. As he spoke, he pointed with his fingers. Wang. A ray of sword light shot down from the sky. Grand Elder Chen's expression changed. He suddenly clenched his right hand into a fist. After a moment of silence, he punched forward. A powerful force erupted from his fist like a volcano. Rumble. Grand Elder Chen's force exploded. Immediately after, Grand Elder Chen retreated frantically, retreating tens of thousands of feet away. Seeing this, Yi Xian's expression darkened. Mu Qingfeng's strength was not just an ordinary level of strength. Mu Qingfeng looked coldly at Grand Elder Qin. He was about to attack again when Yi Xian suddenly said, "Wait." Mu Qingfeng looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian stared at Mu Qingfeng. "I will take responsibility for my own actions. This matter has nothing to do with the dual realm sky. If you have anything to do with it, come at me." Hearing Yi Xian's words, the dual realm sky experts present looked at him with complicated expressions. Mu Qingfeng looked at Yi Xian and smiled. "Sure." As he spoke, he suddenly pointed with his fingers. Wang! A ray of sword light flew down from the sky. Below, Yi Xian narrowed his eyes. After a moment of silence, he suddenly drew his sword. Immeasurable sword. Boom! As the sword slashed down, Yi Xian retreated immediately. Essence and blood sprayed from his mouth. However, after retreating a few dozen feet, his entire person disappeared. Completely disappeared. In the sky, Mu Qingfeng frowned slightly. He looked around, and his divine sense instantly covered a radius of hundreds of thousands of miles. However, it was as if Yi Xian had evaporated from the world. Disappeared. Mu Qingfeng looked around again, but still did not find him. Below, Li Qinfeng said softly, "This person's concealment technique is quite incredible, and the sword technique he used just now is also extremely incredible. It's not simple at all." Mu Qingfeng nodded slightly. "We shouldn't underestimate him. No, I should say that we didn't take him seriously enough." Li Qinfeng said, "Senior brother, please make the decision." Mu Qingfeng looked at the people in the dual realm sky. "All of you are really stupid. You were played like monkeys and you didn't know it. How sad." With that, he turned and left. Li Qinfeng looked at Grand Elder Qin and the others, then also turned and left. Soon, the three people from the sword sect disappeared from the dual realm sky. It was impossible for the three of them to destroy the dual realm sky. The experts in the dual realm sky weren't weak. If the sword sect wanted to destroy the dual realm sky, then they would have to pay an extremely heavy price. After Mu Qingfeng and the others left, Grand Elder Chen's expression was extremely gloomy. Meanwhile, Chen Shi said, "The sword sect is going too far." Grand Elder Chen said indifferently, "They have the ability to." Chen Shi said solemnly, "Grand Elder, what should we do now?" Grand Elder Chen fell silent for a moment, and then he said, "Investigate Yi Xian and see where he is." Chen Shi frowned slightly. "You don't believe him?" Grand Elder Chen shook his head. "Find him and help him in secret. Don't let him fall into the hands of the sword sect." When he spoke up to this point, he glanced coldly at the distant horizon. "The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The more the sword sect makes an enemy of Yi Xian, the more we have to be on good terms with him." Chapter 8:18. In the depths of a certain mountain, Yi Xian was sitting cross-legged on the ground. At this moment, he was still in a state of emptiness. He did not dare to show himself. Once he showed himself, with the strength of the sword sect, it would not be difficult for them to find him. Thus, he could only maintain his state of emptiness. At this moment, his complexion was very bad because he had forcefully resisted Mu Qingfeng's sword. That sword had almost taken his life. Thinking of this, Yi Xian was speechless. He had just reached the creation realm and his strength had increased by leaps and bounds. Then, his enemy had changed. The leader of the sword sect was definitely a peak expert in the fourth dimension. He was only at the creation realm. Why couldn't he wait until he reached the fate realm to meet such a person? Thinking of this, Yi Xian shook his head and sighed. "It's too difficult for me. It's too difficult for me." At this moment, a voice suddenly rang out in Yi Xian's mind. "It's still difficult for you? What did you do to the sword sect?" It was the voice of the 8th floor. Yi Xian was speechless. "Senior, you have to understand that they were the ones who came to mess with me first." The 8th floor said softly, "You said you would give this pagoda away." You went back on your words. Yi Xian was silent. His previous deal with the 8th floor was that he would give this pagoda away. After the other party had completely grasped this pagoda, the 8th floor would kill him. However, this pagoda was still in Yi Xian's hands. Yi Xian thought about it and said, "Senior, how about I give this pagoda to you and you take it back to the 5th dimension?" The 8th floor said, "Do you want me to die?" Yi Xian was confused. "Why?" The 8th floor sighed. "I finally understand that this pagoda has already become one with you. Your karma coexists," Yi Xian said in a deep voice. "With senior strength, your karma can completely snatch this pagoda away and bring it back to the 5th dimension, right?" The 8th floor said, "I felt the aura of a 5th dimension expert before, but it disappeared very quickly. If I'm not wrong, someone has taken care of it for you. If I snatch your pagoda, not only will I be targeted by the people behind you, I will also be targeted by the experts of the 5th dimension. I don't want to live like you." Yi Xian was speechless. He wanted benefits, but he didn't want to be targeted. He also wanted to. Yi Xian seemed to have thought of something and immediately asked, "Senior, can you defeat those 2 swordsmen?" The 8th replied, "What do you think?" Yi Xian said, "Why don't you go beat them up?" "I don't like them." The 8th person laughed and said, "You're so funny. Do you think I'll go?" Yi Xian said, "Senior, are you from the 5th dimension?" The 8th person replied, "Yes." Yi Xian was silent. This 8th floor was truly an expert from the 5th dimension. Yi Xian asked again, "Is the strength of the 5th dimension really much higher than that of the 4th dimension?" The 8th person replied, "The 5th dimension and the 4th dimension are slightly different. The biggest difference is the civilizations on both sides. To put it simply, the current 4th dimension is still pursuing the essence of power and martial arts. My 5th dimension is already pursuing the essence of life and the universe." At this point, he slightly paused and continued, "Actually, the reason why the civilizations of the 5th dimension are so advanced is because of one person. That is the master of this pagoda, the Prophet. I greatly admire him. He is a person that countless experts of the 5th dimension admire because he researched all kinds of knowledge. He did not hide it and was willing to teach it to others. In the 5th dimension, he established no less than hundreds of thousands of academies. Unfortunately, after his disappearance, the original purpose of these academies has changed. They have become tools to fight for power." "Academies?" Yi Xian slightly frowned. "What academies?" The 8th person replied, 10,000 dimensional academies. There are hundreds of thousands of these academies. Apart from them, there is also the 10,000 dimensional academy. This academy was once a holy land in the hearts of everyone in the 5th dimension because of the Prophet. Prophet. Yi Xian was silent. He knew that the previous master of this pagoda was an existence that was highly respected in the 5th dimension. The 8th person continued, "Before I disappeared, the 5th dimension was already in chaos. Especially because of that 10,000 dimensional library, the people of the 5th dimension fought like crazy. Because that library is really too important. You should rejoice. Rejoice that the people of the 4th dimension don't know the true use of this pagoda. Otherwise, they will spare no expense to kill you." Yi Xian lightly said, "There is no difference. Because the people of the 5th dimension will definitely spare no expense to kill me." The 5th dimension. Thinking of this, Yi Xian sighed again. He had not even dealt with the people of the 4th dimension, but the enemies of the 5th dimension were already waiting for him. When would he be able to deal with them? At this moment, Yi Xian really felt tired. Along the way, because of this pagoda, he did not have a good night's sleep. And this kind of days would continue for a very long time, a tiring life. Yi Xian shook his head and sighed. He continued to heal his injuries. With the spring of life, his injuries were quickly healed. After his injuries were healed, Yi Xian directly disappeared. At this moment, there were flying swords flying around the dual realm sky from time to time. The people of the sword sect. The current sword sect was openly looking for Yi Xian outside the dual realm sky. It could be said that they were showing off. Because this time, the sword sect had sent dozens of powerful swordsmen. And the one leading them was Li Chenfeng. The goal of the sword sect now was to find Yi Xian. In the dual realm sky, Yuan Xiaodao looked at the sword sect swordsman flying across the sky and softly said, "The sword sect is sure that the treasure is on him." Zhu Xia softly said, "It's me. I also suspect him. However, I have to say that he is a bit sinister." This time, the sword sect can be said to have suffered a great loss. Yuan Xiaodao shook his head and smiled. "Don't underestimate him. The people behind him are not simple." She still remembered the woman she met in the Nether Palace. That woman's strength, even now, she still felt some fear when she thought about it. The more she interacted with Yi Xian, the more she realized that the people behind this guy were unfathomable. In fact, it was not just the people behind him. Yi Xian himself was a bit difficult to deal with. Apart from experts of Li Chenfeng's level, ordinary people in the sword sect could not pose any threat to him, especially when Yi Xian was an expert in assassination. At this moment, a man suddenly appeared in front of the two women. It was Qin Shi. Qin Shi cupped his fists at Yuan Xiaodao. "Miss Yuan, Grand Elder Qin invites you." Yuan Xiaodao smiled. "The dual realm sky is going to join forces?" Qin Shi smiled. "Now that the sword sect has come to bully us, how can we not join forces?" Yuan Xiaodao thought about it and nodded. "Okay." Hearing this, Qin Shi smiled. With Yuan Xiaodao's participation, the dual realm sky would have an additional strength. Yuan Xiaodao turned to look at Zhu Xia and sent a voice transmission. "Don't let the temple interfere in this matter." Saying this, she turned and left with Qin Shi. Zhu Xia was silent for a moment, then turned and left. Yi Xian left the dual realm sky quietly. He did not dare to stay in the dual realm sky. If the sword sect found him, he would be finished. Outside the dual realm sky, Li Chenfeng sat cross-legged in the air with his eyes closed. A powerful sword intent was emitted from his body. At this moment, Jiang Qi suddenly appeared beside him. "Can't find him. Can't find him." Li Chenfeng opened his eyes. "He used all his strength?" Jiang Qi nodded. "This person seems to have vanished into thin air. There is no trace of him." Li Chenfeng was silent. Jiang Qi said, "His concealment technique," Li Chenfeng suddenly said, "to the black-yellow great world." Jiang Qi looked at Li Chenfeng. The latter was expressionless. "Isn't this person extremely loyal? Then let's go to the black-yellow great world. I believe he will come out, right?" Jiang Qi hesitated for a moment and said, "Such behavior is not something a swordsman should do." Li Chenfeng looked at Jiang Qi. "Then do you have a better idea?" Jiang Qi sighed. "Junior uncle, if we go against those people from the black-yellow great world, we will not be able to get over it." Li Chenfeng shook his head. "I don't want you to slaughter them. I just want to use them to force Yi Xian to come out. If he doesn't come out, everyone in the world will think that the fifth-dimensional treasure is in our sword sect's possession." Jiang Qi thought about it and nodded. Quote, "Fine." Quote, he knew that he couldn't allow Yi Xian to continue concealing himself like this. Because if Yi Xian didn't show himself, then the sword sect would really be unable to do anything to him. Moreover, it wouldn't do if Yi Xian continued developing like this. Because Yi Xian was too monstrous. If he was allowed to continue developing like this, then he would definitely be able to pose a threat to the sword sect. Jiang Qi was just about to leave when Li Chenfeng suddenly said, "I'll go with all of you." Jiang Qi gazed at Li Chenfeng, and the latter said in a light voice, "We can't underestimate him anymore. Let's go." Jiang Qi nodded. In next to no time, their group left the dual world sky and headed straight for the black-yellow great world. After Li Chenfeng and the others left, Zhu Xia appeared. She gazed silently at the direction that Li Chunfeng and the others had left, and then she took out a transmission stone. At the end of the starry sky, Yi Xian suddenly stopped and took out a transmission stone. After a short moment, his expression turned gloomy. The black-yellow great world. Yi Xian remained silent for a moment, and then he waved his right hand lightly and left his empty state. At the instant he left his empty state, Li Chunfeng suddenly stopped in another part of the starry sky, and he turned around. He's appeared. As soon as he finished speaking, he transformed into a ray of light that vanished into the horizon. Jiang Qi and the others hurriedly chased after Li Chunfeng. After Yi Xian appeared in the distant starry sky, he turned around and looked into the distance. A powerful strand of sword intent was pressing towards him from that direction. He knew that the members of the sword sect had noticed him. Needless to say, their strength was truly terrifying. They'd noticed him as soon as he showed himself. What should I do? Yi Xian didn't hesitate at all. He turned around and ran. He'd increased his speed to the limit. Fight? He definitely couldn't defeat them. Get help. Yi Xian's destination was the place he'd been to in the past, the Nether Pavilion. P.S. Your vacation is over. Congratulations, congratulations. Chapter 8:19. Yi Xian raised his speed to the limit. Soon, he entered a black hole region, and as soon as he came out, a sword light appeared in the black hole region behind him. Seeing that, Yi Xian hurried to speed up. Behind him, a sword light chased closely, and the distance between them was closing at an extremely fast speed. Yi Xian did not care about what was behind him. He continued to accelerate, and soon, after passing through a dozen black hole regions, he arrived at the star region where the Nether Hall used to be. But at this moment, this star region had already been sealed. Yi Xian directly barged in. He rushed over with the executing heaven sword in hand, tearing apart everything in his path. When he neared the Nether Hall, a mysterious force suddenly enveloped him. The strength of this force caused Yi Xian's expression to change drastically. He knew that he could not stop this force, and he immediately said, "We're on the same side. We're on the same side." After a moment of silence, the mysterious force suddenly retreated like the tide. Seeing this, Yi Xian immediately heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, Li Chunfeng had already appeared behind him. Yi Xian immediately ran, disappearing in the blink of an eye. Li Chunfeng frowned slightly. He was about to give chase when Jiang Qi appeared beside him. Jiang Qi looked at Yi Xian in the distance and said in a low voice, "I'm afraid it's a trap." Li Chunfeng was silent. Yi Xian was not his match, but he did not dare to underestimate Yi Xian. He knew very well that many people often died because they underestimated their enemies. It was obvious that Yi Xian was planning to take him to this place. Jiang Qi said in a low voice, "Let's investigate first." Li Chunfeng shook his head. "It's not that there are no people in the four-dimensional universe who can kill me, but there are definitely more than a handful of them." As soon as he finished speaking, he lightly stomped his right foot, turned into a sword light, and disappeared into the distance. Jiang Qi hesitated for a moment, and then he took out a small sword. The small sword trembled slightly, turned into a sword light, and disappeared at the end of the horizon. Jiang Qi was silent for a moment, and then he followed. In the distance, Yi Xian arrived at the previous hall. Netherworld Hall. Yi Xian walked to the entrance of the main hall. He walked in front of the 11 statues. These statues were all women. He did not recognize them, nor did he know who they were. The reason he came here was actually to try his luck. At this moment, Li Chunfeng appeared behind Yi Xian. Li Chunfeng glanced at the Nether Palace and frowned. "Where is this?" Beside him, Jiang Qi shook his head. "I don't know." Li Chunfeng looked at Yi Xian with a hint of wariness in his eyes. He had the absolute strength to crush Yi Xian, but he didn't dare to be careless. Yi Xian walked to the statue of the woman in the cloth dress. He hesitated for a moment before asking softly, "Senior, are you there?" No response. Yi Xian was a little embarrassed. If he didn't come out, then he would be finished. He shouted again, but there was still no response. Yi Xian was silent. This wasn't going to be easy. At this moment, Li Chunfeng suddenly asked, "What are you doing?" Yi Xian turned to look at Li Chunfeng. "I have a question, and I hope you can answer it." Li Chunfeng said calmly, "What is it?" Yi Xian smiled. "Why do you not only want my pagoda, but also my life?" When the sword sect came to find him, he took the initiative to hand over the pagoda. However, the other party not only wanted his pagoda, but also his life. This was something he could not understand. Because he did not have any deep hatred with the other party. Li Chunfeng looked at Yi Xian. "We do not have any deep hatred with you. We just want to exterminate you." "Exterminate you?" Yi Xian smiled. "I understand." Li Chunfeng glanced behind Yi Xian. "Where are your people?" Yi Xian was struck dumb. Then he said, "Who?" Li Chunfeng said calmly, "You didn't lure me here to fight me one-on-one, right?" Yi Xian was silent for a moment, and then he said, "I can't defeat you, but I want to have a fair battle with you." Li Chunfeng suddenly spread open his palms again, and then he pressed down lightly. In next to no time, his cultivation was directly suppressed to the creation realm. Li Chunfeng looked at Yi Xian. "I want to see exactly how monstrous you are. Come." Yi Xian nodded slightly. He suddenly vanished, and in the next moment, a sword had arrived half an inch away from Li Chunfeng's forehead. However, right when this sword was about to stab into Li Chunfeng's forehead, it suddenly retreated like a bolt of lightning. At the same time, Yi Xian instantly retreated 300 m back. When he stopped, a drop of blood slowly dripped down from the space between his brows. Li Chunfeng's sword was faster than his. Yi Xian lightly touched the space between his brows, and in the next moment, he suddenly vanished. Hiss! A speck of sword light arrived before the space between Li Chunfeng's brows. Li Chunfeng's face was expressionless. A speck of cold light appeared on the tip of his finger, and in the blink of an eye, this speck of cold light had already appeared between Yi Xian's brows. Yi Xian chose to withdraw his sword once more, and he retreated 300 m back. After he stopped, Yi Xian's face sank. Fast. Li Chunfeng's sword could only be described in one word, fast. A single word that could suppress everything. In all the martial arts in the world, only speed was unbeatable. When your speed reached a certain level, you could really disregard everything. Yi Xian's sword was actually very fast as well, but when compared to Li Chunfeng, it was still quite a bit inferior. Li Chunfeng walked slowly towards Yi Xian and said in a light voice, "I started practicing the sword at the age of 6, and from the age of 6, I swung my sword at least 10,000 times every day for a few decades. After that, I spent the first half of my life pursuing the speed of the sword. Up until now, I've never seen anyone's sword be faster than mine. Even my senior brother's sword is inferior to mine in terms of speed." Yi Xian nodded. "Your sword is fast." Li Chunfeng looked at Yi Xian. "No, I can be even faster." As his voice fell, he suddenly vanished, and a ray of sword light flashed through the field. This ray of sword light was so fast that it could not be seen by the naked eye. Not far away, Yi Xian suddenly closed his eyes, and he stabbed forward with his sword in his left hand. Boom! This stab directly stabbed the ray of sword light, and the sword light shattered. The two swords were pointed at each other. A trace of surprise flashed through Li Chunfeng's eyes. He had not expected that Yi Xian would be able to withstand this strike of his. It was slightly beyond his expectations. Li Chunfeng said softly, He'd only just spoken up to hear when Yi Xian's sword suddenly moved slightly to the side, and then it stabbed forward towards Li Chunfeng's throat. Li Chunfeng didn't dodge, nor did he defend. He stabbed his sword towards Yi Xian's throat instead. Because his sword was faster than Yi Xian's, he was confident that his sword would be able to end Yi Xian before Yi Xian's sword could stab him. Confidence. This time, Yi Xian didn't stop. Li Qinfeng's sword stabbed directly at Yi Xian's throat. At practically the exact same moment, Yi Xian's sword stabbed at Li Qinfeng's throat as well. However, Li Qinfeng had just stabbed half an inch into Yi Xian's throat when Li Qinfeng vanished on the spot, and when he appeared again, he was already 3 kilometers away. Yi Xian stood on the spot, and fresh blood was flowing from his throat. His physical body was still unable to withstand Li Qinfeng's sword. However, Li Qinfeng's sword wasn't able to kill him either because Li Qinfeng had withdrawn his sword at the critical moment. If he didn't withdraw his sword, then even if Yi Xian didn't die, his physical body would be gone. Of course, Li Qinfeng would die as well because he held the celestial sword in his hand. No matter how formidable Li Qinfeng was, he would die without a doubt if he was struck by the executing heaven sword. The reason Yi Xian did this was because he knew that if they really fought, he would absolutely not be a match for Li Qinfeng. Since he wasn't a match for Li Qinfeng, then he might as well exchange a life for a life. In that instant just now, he was really prepared to die. Yi Xian didn't want to die, but he wasn't afraid of death. Risking his life? He had never been afraid. Opposite Yi Xian, Li Qinfeng looked at Yi Xian. I underestimated your courage. He didn't expect that Yi Xian would actually exchange a life for a life with him. He naturally wouldn't exchange a life for a life with Yi Xian, because he would suffer a loss. One had to know that as long as he recovered his realm, he could easily kill Yi Xian. However, in that exchange just now, because he retreated, it could be said that he had lost by half a point. Li Qinfeng looked at Yi Xian. You are indeed a monster. The second affirmation. Jiang Qi, who was beside Li Qinfeng, was somewhat shocked. This Yi Xian actually made Li Qinfeng praise him twice. One had to know that in the sword sect, Li Qinfeng had basically never praised anyone. He had even said that there was no one in the current younger generation of the sword sect. But now, he had actually praised Yi Xian twice. At this moment, Li Qinfeng said, if you are willing to hand over that fifth-dimensional treasure, I am willing to bring you into the sword sect and let you become the next young sect leader of my sword sect. Young sect leader. Hearing Li Qinfeng's words, Jiang Qi was slightly startled. Let Yi Xian join the sword sect? What kind of operation was this? In the distance, Yi Xian smiled slightly. Do you really think that the treasure is on me? Li Qinfeng looked at Yi Xian. Are you still going to pretend to be crazy? That treasure has already recognized you as its master. Only you have the ability to make it cooperate with you, right? Yi Xian smiled awkwardly. It really isn't on me. This was something he couldn't admit even if he was beaten to death. Because once he admitted it, then his enemy wouldn't just be the sword sect, but also the dual realm sky. Li Qinfeng looked at Yi Xian without saying anything, but his aura suddenly soared. After a moment, he had completely recovered his realm. Yi Xian said in a low voice, was it an unfair fight? Li Qinfeng shook his head. I don't want to waste time with you. Regardless of whether that treasure is on you or not, you can't keep it. Once a person like Yi Xian grew up, he would definitely become a great threat to the sword sect in the future. Thinking of this, the murderous intent in Li Qinfeng's eyes intensified. He opened his palm, and a wisp of sword light flickered in his palm. As this wisp of sword light appeared, a powerful sword intent swept towards Yi Xian. In the distance, Yi Xian slowly closed his eyes. At this moment, he was prepared to fight with his life on the line. It should be said that he had no choice but to fight with his life on the line. His greatest trump card was the 6 paths of truth. No, there was still another extremely powerful trump card. In the distance, Li Qinfeng looked at Yi Xian. The wisp of sword light in his palm suddenly trembled violently, and the surrounding space began to crack like a spider web. It was extremely frightening. After a moment of silence, the wisp of sword light in Li Qinfeng's hand suddenly flew out. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. "Come on, play with your life." As soon as his voice fell, boom. In an instant, the sky was a sea of blood. This time, he no longer suppressed his bloodline. Chapter 820. Bloodline. This could be said to be his strongest trump card. Ever since his bloodline had devoured the blood ancestor, he had never activated the power of this bloodline again. Because he couldn't control it. Before he devoured the blood ancestor, he already couldn't control it, and after devouring it, he couldn't control it even more. Thus, he had been suppressing his bloodline. But now, he was about to die, so what was the point of suppressing it? Do it. The moment he activated the power of his bloodline, Yi Xian felt his mind go blank. Then, a violent aura and killing intent erupted from his body like a volcano. Boom! In an instant, the space within a radius of tens of thousands of miles turned into a sea of blood. Opposite Yi Xian, Li Chenfeng frowned. What bloodline is this? In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. Li Chenfeng raised his hand and slashed. Boom! A sword light and a bloody light suddenly exploded. In an instant, Yi Xian and Li Chenfeng retreated at the same time. With this retreat, Li Chenfeng retreated hundreds of feet, and Yi Xian also retreated hundreds of feet. At the sight of this, Jiang Qi's expression changed. He didn't expect Yi Xian's sword to be evenly matched with Li Chenfeng's. How was this possible? Jiang Qi's eyes were filled with disbelief. Li Chenfeng's brows also furrowed as he stared at Yi Xian. What kind of bloodline is this? He naturally knew that Yi Xian's sudden increase in strength was because of this bloodline. But what he didn't understand was what bloodline could make Yi Xian's strength so powerful. However, he didn't expect that this was just the beginning. Not far away, the aura on Yi Xian's body was rising wildly, and the violent aura and killing intent around him were also becoming stronger. At this moment, Yi Xian only had a trace of consciousness left. He was desperately guarding this trace of consciousness, but what he didn't know was that because he hadn't fallen into madness, the power of his bloodline could not be completely released. The crazed demon bloodline. If one did not go crazy, they would not survive. Right at this moment, Li Chenfeng suddenly pointed with his fingers, and a wisp of sword light slashed straight at Yi Xian. Yi Xian suddenly lifted his head. The executing heaven sword in his hand suddenly slashed forward. Boom! This slash directly shattered the sword light. At the same time, a blood-red sword light pressed straight towards Li Chenfeng. Li Chenfeng opened his palm, and a dark green sword suddenly appeared in it. In the next moment, his entire person suddenly disappeared. Chi! The sound of tearing resounded, and then the blood-red ray of light was instantly torn apart. Meanwhile, a sword had arrived in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian held his sword with both hands and slashed down. Boom! An azure-colored sword light and a blood-red sword light suddenly exploded out, and Yi Xian instantly retreated explosively by over 300 m. However, Li Chenfeng retreated an entire 300 m as well, and it wasn't just that. Countless cracks had appeared on the azure-colored sword in his hand. Very few swords could go head-on against the executing heaven sword. Li Chenfeng gazed at the executing heaven sword in Yi Xian's hand and said, "What a good sword." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly closed his eyes, and then the azure-colored sword in his hand suddenly trembled violently. In the next moment, a sword howl resounded in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian raised his sword instinctively to block it. Bang! A powerful force passed through the executing heaven sword and smashed onto Yi Xian. Bang! Yi Xian was blasted flying. Blood essence sprayed out repeatedly from his mouth, and he absorbed it as soon as it left his mouth. This caused Yi Xian to move 3 kilometers back. As soon as he stopped moving, Li Chenfeng suddenly stretched out his right hand from 3 kilometers away, and then he pressed it down lightly. In the distance, above Yi Xian's head, a green sword suddenly slashed down. This sword strike was peerless like a thunderclap. Right at this moment, Yi Xian suddenly stomped his right foot on the ground, and then he transformed into a ray of light that shot into the sky. Face it head on. The current Yi Xian would not dodge at all, nor could he dodge. This was because Li Qinfeng's sword was too fast. If he dodged, he would be suppressed to death. He could only choose to face it head on. Very quickly, Yi Xian's sword struck the azure-colored sword. Bang! In the sky, a ray of light suddenly exploded, and this powerful force caused Yi Xian to retreat repeatedly. However, Li Qinfeng's azure-colored sword had already exploded into a pile of fragments. Seeing this, Li Qinfeng beckoned with his right hand, and the fragments flew in front of him. Looking at the pile of fragments, Li Qinfeng's expression was somewhat complicated. This sword had been with him for so many years, and he had never expected it to shatter here. Shatter. Li Qinfeng looked at Yi Xian in the distance. At this moment, the aura around Yi Xian was still rising madly. Seeing this, Li Qinfeng frowned slightly. Just what kind of bloodline is this? It's actually so powerful. As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly pointed in the air with his finger, and a ray of sword light shot out from the tip of his finger. Finger as a sword. At the moment when he made his move, Yi Xian, who was in the distance, also suddenly drew his sword. A blood-red sword light flew towards him like a bolt of lightning. This ray of blood-red sword light directly struck Li Qinfeng's ray of sword light. Bang! As soon as the two of them collided, they suddenly exploded. At this moment, Li Qinfeng suddenly appeared in front of Yi Xian, and an enormous iron sword had suddenly appeared in his hand. He held the iron sword in his hand, and he suddenly slashed it towards Yi Xian's head. Bang! With this slash, the space around Yi Xian exploded into nothingness. Sensing danger, Yi Xian suddenly roared furiously, and he suddenly raised his sword with both hands. Head on. Bang! Yi Xian's entire body was instantly blasted away, and Li Qinfeng actually didn't move from his spot. In the distance, Yi Xian only stopped after flying for thousands of feet. When he stopped, his body directly cracked open, and countless amounts of blood splattered. It was extremely shocking. Li Qinfeng was about to attack again, but at this moment, Yi Xian's eyes suddenly became a sea of blood. At this moment, the last bit of consciousness in his mind had already disappeared. He had completely gone mad. Bang! A ray of blood-red light shot up from his body into the depths of the starry sky. In an instant, the entire starry sky became a sea of blood. Li Qinfeng stared at Yi Xian. Just what kind of monster are you? At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly raised his head to look at Li Qinfeng. The next moment, a ray of blood-red sword light suddenly appeared in front of him. Fast. This sword was extremely fast. It was so fast that even Li Qinfeng's expression changed. The speed of this sword was even half a beat faster than his. Li Qinfeng pointed his finger forward, and this finger directly touched the tip of Yi Xian's sword. Bang! This time, Yi Xian didn't retreat. It was Li Qinfeng who retreated. He retreated thousands of feet away. Not only that, but his two fingers were also blown up. Seeing this scene, Jiang Qi, who was nearby, was stunned. This Yi Xian's strength was actually terrifying to such an extent. Li Qinfeng's eyes were filled with disbelief. How is this possible? In the distance, Yi Xian suddenly raised his head and roared furiously. A ray of blood-red light surged from his mouth. At this moment, he had completely lost his mind. Slaughter. There was only slaughter in his mind. Yi Xian looked at the nearby Li Qinfeng and smiled savagely. In the next moment, a ray of blood-red sword light had already arrived in front of Li Qinfeng. Li Qinfeng's eyes narrowed slightly, and he gestured with both hands. In an instant, countless rays of sword light flew out from his body. These rays of sword light instantly drowned Yi Xian, and in an instant, countless rays of blood-red light directly drowned these rays of sword light. At this moment, Li Qinfeng suddenly charged into the blood technique, and in next to no time, numerous sword hums resounded incessantly from within the blood-red light. The more Jiang Qi watched, the more shocked he became. He hadn't expected that Yi Xian would actually be able to fight Li Qinfeng equally. That was Li Qinfeng, the number 3 figure of the sword sect, a top-notch expert in this world. Yet now, Yi Xian was actually able to fight him equally. How could this be possible? Jiang Qi's expression was extremely unsightly. In the distance, numerous explosions resounded incessantly from within the blood-red light, and the battle was growing more and more intense. At this moment, Yi Xian was like a wild beast that had lost its mind. Coupled with the executing heaven sword in his hand, even Li Qinfeng had to be wary of him. Most importantly, Yi Xian's strength was still growing. This caused Li Qinfeng's expression to become extremely unsightly. If this continued, then Yi Xian would gain a huge advantage. After around an hour, the area where Yi Xian and Li Qinfeng stood exploded apart. At the same time, a figure retreated explosively. It was Li Qinfeng. Li Qinfeng retreated 3 kilometers away, and he hadn't even stopped when another expanse of blood-red light enveloped him. At the same time, Yi Xian had arrived in front of him. Rumble. Numerous sword howls resounded incessantly amidst the blood-red light, and the space in the surroundings collapsed incessantly. At this moment, Jiang Qi had already retreated over 30 kilometers away because the energy was truly too strong. However, he was slightly shocked because the nearby Nether Pavilion was completely unharmed. During this period of time, the Nether Pavilion had been blasted by the energy of Yi Xian and Li Qinfeng. However, no matter if it was the energy of Yi Xian or Li Qinfeng, they weren't able to cause the slightest damage to the Nether Pavilion. Extraordinary. Jiang Qi took a deep glance at the Nether Pavilion and fell silent. Right at this moment, the distant sea of blood exploded once more. In an instant, a figure retreated explosively. This person was still Li Qinfeng, and as he retreated, countless flying swords flew out from his hands. However, these flying swords were instantly swallowed by an expanse of blood red. These flying swords were actually no match for the sea of blood. In next to no time, Li Qinfeng stopped. At this moment, there were actually numerous sword wounds on his body. Li Qinfeng looked into the distance, and a man walked out from within the sea of blood. It was Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian was like a person made of blood, and it was extremely shocking. Yi Xian walked towards Li Qinfeng slowly. His whole body was full of blood and energy. Even the sword intent he gave off had turned blood red. The power of his bloodline had completely suppressed his sword intent. Moreover, the executing heaven sword in his hand had turned blood red as well. Yi Xian walked slowly towards Li Qinfeng, and behind him was a sea of blood. At this moment, a voice suddenly resounded in Yi Xian's mind. What a terrifying bloodline. Your father is probably not a kind person. The voice from the 8th floor. P.S. Guess who exactly Yi Xian's father is? Chapter 821. Bloodline Power. Not only were Li Qinfeng and Jiang Qin shocked, even the 8th floor was shocked. This was because after Yi Xian completely released this bloodline power, it was as if he had become a completely different person. What kind of bloodline was this? The 8th floor was also somewhat curious. It must be known that there were some bloodline clans in the 5th dimension. These clans specialized in the study of bloodlines. It could be said that they had cultivated the path of bloodlines to the pinnacle. In particular, there were some legendary ancient bloodlines that were truly formidable. And Yi Xian's bloodline was not only powerful, it was also somewhat strange. This bloodline stimulation made him look like a madman. This was the first time he had seen such a thing. What kind of bloodline was this? For the first time, the 8th floor had a trace of curiosity in his heart. Opposite Yi Xian, Li Qinfeng's expression could be said to be extremely ugly at this moment. He was actually being suppressed. He was being suppressed by a young man who did not know how many years younger than him. Moreover, the other party was a swordsman. It had to be said that this was somewhat humiliating. Li Chenfeng stared at Yi Xian. Around him, countless sword intents surged, and at the same time, there was a constant flash of sword light. At this moment, Yi Xian suddenly disappeared. Qi! A blood-red sword light tore through the battlefield. Li Chenfeng clasped his hands together, and an illusory sword suddenly condensed above his head. In the next moment, he took a step forward. Slash! The sound was like thunder. Hum! Following the sound of a sword, the sword above his head ruthlessly slashed down. This sword directly slashed at the blood-red sword light of Yi Xian. Boom! In an instant, that blood-red sword light directly exploded, but in the next moment, a sea of blood directly drowned Li Chenfeng. Rumble, rumble, rumble. Within that sea of blood, the sound of swords continuously rang out. Not far away, Jiang Qi's face was gloomy. He did not choose to act. If he did not receive Li Chenfeng's permission, he could not act. Once he acted, it might ruin Li Chenfeng's state of mind. However, Yi Xian, who had activated the power of his bloodline, was no longer someone Li Chenfeng could deal with. Right when Jiang Qi was hesitating, the cry of a sword suddenly resounded in the distant sky, and then an illusory middle-aged man appeared in the starry sky. Sword sect leader, Mu Qingfeng. However, it wasn't his main body that came. Seeing Mu Qingfeng, Jiang Qi immediately breathed a sigh of relief. He was the one who informed Mu Qingfeng. When he came here before, he felt that something was wrong. Therefore, he decided to inform Mu Qingfeng just in case. In the sky, Mu Qingfeng glanced at the sea of blood. In the next moment, he pointed out with his finger, an array of sword light tore through the battlefield. In the blink of an eye, the sea of blood was torn apart. At the same time, a figure retreated explosively from within the sea of blood. It was Yi Xian. Yi Xian retreated to the front of the Nether Palace. On his chest, there was a hole made by a sword. In the distant sky, Mu Qingfeng looked at Yi Xian. You really surprised me. He was really surprised because he hadn't expected that Yi Xian would actually be able to suppress Li Chenfeng. How unbelievable was that? In the distance, Yi Xian held the blood-red executing heaven sword tightly in his hand. In fact, he had lost all rationality at this moment. Kill. There was only one word in his mind, and that was kill. Kill madly. Yi Xian slowly stood up. Qingcheng, Yi family, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From this moment on, Yi Xian's position as crown prince is removed and Yi Lang will succeed him. The person who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the elders of the Yi mansion. Why? At this moment, a timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a hint of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian, she ignored her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. This is a family matter. What are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, and did not dare to look at the Great Elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed again to the elders on both sides. Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li family over the mining rights at Nanshan Hill. He is fighting for the family, and his life is uncertain. But the family is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is unfair. Impudent. The great elder suddenly raged, whether he's crippled or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The great elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 guards of the Yi mansion rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years. Even now, he's fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the crown prince's position. It's everyone's wish. What are you shouting for?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she didn't cry. She just held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, "What's your name?" The guard quickly bowed. "This subordinate, Zhang Mu, greets the crown prince." Yi Lang nodded, "You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I'll need 10 personal guards. You can be my personal guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He quickly bowed deeply. "This subordinate will go through fire and water for the crown prince. I'll be willing to risk my life for you." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back." Understood. Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder squinted his eyes, his face dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian was like a ferocious tiger, leaping in front of him. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt dizzy, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, barking, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped down on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being cut by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? At this time, a timid voice rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yiling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian from his position, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yiling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yiling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall, and asked timidly, "Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The Great Elder looked at Yiling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave." Yiling was obviously afraid, and did not dare to look at the Great Elder. However, she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. Once again, she bowed to the elders. "Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan for the rights to the mine. He is fighting for the clan, and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent." The Great Elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The Great Elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, Yi clan guards rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists, and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the prince's position, and it's everyone's wish. What are you shouting for?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yiling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yiling's face instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and said with a smile, "What's your name?" The guard quickly bowed. "This subordinate, Zhang Mu, greets the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 personal guards. From now on, you'll be my personal guard." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. "This subordinate is willing to go through water and tread on fire for the prince, even if it means death." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall, do not hold back." "Understood." Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Inside the ancestral hall, all the elders frowned. The Great Elder's eyes narrowed, and his face darkened. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and he charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me." Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pang! Chapter 822. Yi Xian was stunned. Killed the 8th floor? This cloth-dressed woman could kill the 8th floor? Thinking of this, Yi Xian's mind went blank. It must be known that the 8th floor came from the 5th dimension. A 5th dimension expert. This cloth-dressed woman could actually kill him. What kind of concept was this? There was no reply from the 8th floor. Yi Xian hastily returned to the World Prison Pagoda. The cloth-dressed woman looked at the 8th floor, her eyes cold. Yi Xian hesitated, then asked, "What's wrong?" The cloth-dressed woman looked at Yi Xian. "I can feel that he has bad intentions." Yi Xian said in a low voice, "Can you beat him?" The cloth-dressed woman asked, "Can I not beat him?" Yi Xian said, "He came from the 5th dimension." The cloth-dressed woman shook her head. Being from the 5th dimension does not mean being very strong. Being from the 4th dimension does not mean being weak. Yi Xian was silent. At this moment, he somewhat understood. Not all people from the 5th dimension were very strong. In other words, there were also super experts in the 4th dimension. These people did not fear the 5th dimension. For example, this person in front of him, the cloth-dressed woman, or Qing Er. In short, the 5th dimension was not so high and unattainable. Yi Xian collected his thoughts and looked at the 8th floor. Should he let the cloth-dressed woman kill him? The other party had always harbored bad intentions, but he could not do anything about it. At this moment, the cloth-dressed woman had the strength to kill him. Should he kill him? Yi Xian was silent. At this time, the cloth-dressed woman looked at Yi Xian. "You are not his opponent now. How about I help you get rid of this scourge?" Yi Xian shook his head. "It's fine." The cloth-dressed woman was somewhat astonished. "Why?" Yi Xian smiled. "With this senior on the 8th floor, I will always be vigilant and will not dare to relax." The cloth-dressed woman looked at Yi Xian. "Are you sure?" Yi Xian nodded. "Yes." Speaking to there, he looked at the 8th floor. "Sir, I have no enmity with you, nor do I want to have enmity with you. Sir, you have two choices. The first choice is to leave this tower, and the second choice is to stay in this tower. However, Senior has to." The man on the 8th floor suddenly laughed. "Do you really think she can kill me?" Yi Xian was silent. An instant later, Yi Xian looked at the cloth-dressed woman. Kill her. If he could have a good talk, he would definitely do so because he did not want to make enemies everywhere. Everyone wanted to have another friend. But if he couldn't negotiate, he definitely wouldn't. Hearing Yi Xian's words, the woman suddenly opened her right hand. In the next moment, a mysterious force suddenly entered the 8th floor. At this moment, a powerful force suddenly swept out from the 8th floor. Sensing this power, Yi Xian's expression instantly changed. This power was much stronger than what Li Qinfeng and Mu Qingfeng had faced before. The strength of the 8th floor was terrifying. However, as soon as this power appeared, it disappeared without a trace, as if it had never disappeared. At this moment, a low voice suddenly came from the 8th floor. You can actually use the yin-yang law to this extent. Even in the 5th dimension, not many people can do this. Limit. The cloth-dressed woman's use of the yin-yang law could be said to have reached the limit of the 4th dimension. Even in the 5th dimension, not many people could do this. At this moment, the person on the 8th floor suddenly said, "Let's talk." Talk. He knew that even if the cloth-dressed woman could not kill him, she could definitely injure him. Most importantly, this was not the cloth-dressed woman's real body. Qingcheng, Yi family, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From this moment on, Yi Xian's position as crown prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The person who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth. The youth had a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi family's elders. Why? At this moment, a timid voice suddenly rang out in the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a hint of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the ancestral hall and said timidly, "Great elder, my brother Yi Xian is a crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The great elder looked coldly at Yi Ling. "This is a family matter. Why are you interrupting? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the great elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent." The great elder suddenly raged, "Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The great elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, 2 Yi family's guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years. Even now, he's fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she did not cry. She only covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, "What's your name?" The guard hurriedly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yi Lang nodded, "You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He hurriedly bowed deeply. "Subordinate will go through fire and water for the crown prince. I'll do anything for you." Yi Lang nodded slightly. "Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back. Understood?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man wore a tight-fitting robe. The robe was tattered and covered in blood. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt dizzy, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed, brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned, Yi Ling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall, as she asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly, this is a matter of the clan, what are you interrupting for? Leave. Yi Ling was obviously afraid, not daring to look at the Great Elder, but she did not leave. Instead, she plucked up her courage and walked into the hall. Once again, she bowed to the elders, Dear elders, my brother is fighting with the Li clan over the mining rights at Nanshan. He is fighting for the clan, and it is unknown whether he is dead or alive. Yet, the clan is using a groundless excuse to strip him of his position. This is really unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged, whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed, he should be flogged 30 times, as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, two Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, this is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he is fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, young master Yi Lang inherits the prince's position. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled, what's your name? The guard quickly bowed, this subordinate, Zhang Mu, greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded. You're not bad. After I become the prince, I will need 10 guards. From now on, you will be my guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. This subordinate will go through fire and water for the prince, and I will do anything for you. Yi Lang nodded. Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Do not hold back, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. Inside the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside the hall. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed, brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 823. The woman glanced at Yi Xian, and it didn't take long for Yi Xian to return to normal. Yi Xian instantly heaved a sigh of relief. He'd only known that the woman was formidable, but he hadn't had such a deep impression of it. At this moment, her attack allowed him to truly sense how formidable she was. It was too terrifying. That was the only way he could describe it. Because at that instant just now, he felt like he was about to die of old age. Moreover, he couldn't resist it at all. What sword intent? What sword skill? All of them were useless at this moment. Yi Xian wiped off the cold sweat on his forehead. Looks like it's better for me to speak less in the future. Trouble comes from the mouth. The ancients weren't wrong. The cloth-dressed woman continued to walk forward. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and said, Senior, your laws. Why do I feel like they're quite unsolvable? The woman shook her head. It's not unsolvable, but your sword isn't strong enough. As she spoke, she paused for a moment and said, Your strength isn't strong enough. Yi Xian hesitated for a moment and asked, What kind of strength is sufficient? The woman thought for a moment and said, Like the woman in a plain dress. Yi Xian was speechless. A short while later, Yi Xian asked another question. How big is the gap between me and the woman in a plain dress? The woman thought for a moment and said, Not very big. Yi Xian was delighted to hear that. At this moment, the woman in the linen dress said again, Can you stop asking such questions? To be honest, I don't want to discourage you as I'm afraid of hurting your young heart. Yi Xian was speechless. After that, Yi Xian remained silent for quite some time. He knew that the gap between him and the woman in a plain dress was extremely huge. Yi Xian shook his head. He felt that the woman in a plain dress was like a god that couldn't be surpassed. Meanwhile, the woman said, "You must establish a sword Dao of your own, and you must attain the Dao, the true Dao. Only then will you be able to rival her. According to my knowledge, only 2 people in this world are capable of accomplishing that." Yi Xian asked, "The other 2 swords at the top of the pagoda?" The cloth-dressed woman nodded. "It's them." Yi Xian thought for a moment before asking, "Along the way, I've met many people, some of whom are as powerful as Senior. These people all know me, and Senior also knows me, but I don't know any of you." As he spoke up to hear, he looked at the woman in the cotton dress. Why? This was something he had always been puzzled about, because along the way, he realized that his ID card wasn't that simple. After a moment of silence, the woman said, "You're quite special, and you have great karma on you." Yi Xian asked, "What great karma?" The woman shook her head. "I don't know either." Yi Xian still wanted to ask something, but the woman in a cotton dress suddenly said, "The affairs of the world are unpredictable, fate is unpredictable. Everything has to be normal. Don't think too much and walk the path you're on." Yi Xian nodded and felt that it made sense. Meanwhile, the woman said, "In any case, you don't have a choice. Since you don't have a choice, then accept it." Yi Xian was speechless. Just like that, Yi Xian slowly followed the woman into the depths of the starry sky. As for where they were going, he didn't dare to ask. He was afraid of getting beaten up if he asked too much. The Sword Sect. The Sword Sect was located in the Sword Realm. It was a special place because, from a certain point of view, it didn't belong to the 4th dimension. Of course, it didn't belong to the 5th dimension either. It could be said that it belonged between the 2. This place was closer to the 5th dimension than the dual realm sky. This was the result of countless ancestors of the Sword Sect working hard. Generation after generation of experts of the Sword Sect. Qingcheng, Yi family's ancestral shrine. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent and no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as the crown prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The person who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man stood a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides were the Yi family's elders. Why? At this moment, a timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral shrine. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yi Ling. She was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the family wanted to remove Yi Xian from his position, she rushed over despite her illness. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed slightly to the people in the ancestral shrine and said timidly, "Great Elder, my brother Yi Xian is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The Great Elder glanced coldly at Yi Ling. "This is a family matter. Why are you interrupting? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. This is truly unfair. Impudent." The Great Elder suddenly raged, "Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The Great Elder coldly replied, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, two Yi family's guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years. Even now, he's fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap was heard. Yi Ling's right cheek instantly turned red and swollen. However, she didn't cry. She just covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled, "What's your name?" The guard quickly bowed. "Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince." Yi Lang nodded, "You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I'll need 10 personal guards. You can be my personal guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed. He quickly bowed deeply, "I'll go through fire and water for the crown prince. I'll do anything for you." Yi Lang nodded, "Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back." "Understood." Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang. When he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something and stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Within the ancestral hall, all the elders were frowning. The great elder narrowed his eyes. His face was dark and gloomy. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. "Who gave you the guts to touch my sister?" When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt his head spin, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there. He charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, "Yi Xian, he's my man. How dare you!" Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly. Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me!" Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced apart. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed, "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the Yi clan elders. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that the clan wanted to remove Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yi Ling, what are you doing? The girl called Yi Ling bowed to everyone in the hall, as she asked timidly, Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. This is a matter of the clan, why are you butting in? Leave. Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. This is truly unfair. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged. Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder replied coldly, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of prince. What are you shouting about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled, What's your name? The guard hurriedly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the prince. Yi Lang nodded, You're not bad. After I become the prince, I'll need 10 guards. From now on, you'll be my guard. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and hurriedly bowed deeply. I'll go through fire and water for the prince, and I'll do anything for you. Yi Lang nodded, Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand? Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and suddenly stopped. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He hurriedly looked at Yi Lang, and just as he was about to speak, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and he charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, Your man? As he spoke, he stomped down on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 824. Tao Annihilation. It was not just a realm, but also an attitude towards the universe and all living beings. She knew that after the plain-dressed woman, no one else had reached the Tao Annihilation realm. Even the other two peerless swordsmen had not reached it. Of course, this did not mean that the two swordsmen's realm was lower than the plain-dressed woman's, but the Tao Annihilation realm was exclusive to the plain-dressed woman. This did not mean that others could not reach the Tao Annihilation realm. As long as one had the plain-dressed woman's strength, as well as her domineering ability to look down on everything, they could also reach this realm. Could anyone have the strength of the plain-dressed woman? Yes. The other two swordsmen did. However, the two swordsmen's sword principle was completely different from the plain-dressed woman's sword principle. In particular, the green-robed man's sword principle could be said to be the opposite of the plain-dressed woman's sword principle. The green-robed man's sword principle had too many ties, and it was these ties that formed his sword principle. As for the other swordsman's sword principle, it was a lonely sword principle. It cut off all causes and effects. There was only one sword in his heart, and it was the pinnacle of the sword. This swordsman's sword principle was the purest. As for the plain-dressed woman's sword principle, it was ruthless, but her feelings were only for one person. Apart from this person, she was not ruthless, but she was heartless. There would not be a second plain-dressed woman in this world. The plain-dressed woman did not speak again. Although she was once an enemy of the plain-dressed woman, she had to admit that she was powerful enough to make people despair. The plain-dressed woman looked at Yi Xian with a complicated expression. If this guy in front of her fell, she could not imagine what that woman would do. Not only that woman, but there was also another person. That guy was usually joking and looked harmless, but when he was really angry, his craziness was definitely not inferior to the plain-dressed woman. Thinking of this, the plain-dressed woman suddenly looked at Yi Xian and said softly, "Actually, you're also lucky." Lucky? Yi Xian was a little puzzled. "Senior, what do you mean?" The plain-dressed woman said softly, "Because there are many people who care about you." Yi Xian was silent. A lot of people. In the past, he might not have believed it, but now, he somewhat believed it. Because along the way, he had met many noble people. In fact, he was a little curious about his past life. What kind of existence was he in his previous life? Right at this moment, the woman suddenly said, "We're here." Yi Xian looked up and saw a small bamboo house in the depths of the starry sky. Bamboo house? Yi Xian was just about to speak when the woman suddenly said, "Let's go." Yi Xian nodded. The woman brought Yi Xian to the bamboo house. In front of the bamboo house, there was a small pavilion. In the pavilion, there was a stone table and 2 stone stools. On the table, there was an unfinished game of chess. The woman walked to the front of the bamboo house. She gently pushed the door open and walked in. Beside her was Yi Xian. Yi Xian looked around and finally, he looked at the wall in front of him. There was a woman's portrait floating in the air. Yi Xian was about to speak, but the woman said softly, "Kowtow." Yi Xian was stunned. The woman said again, "Kowtow." Yi Xian hesitated for a moment, then slowly knelt down. At this moment, the woman said softly, "She deserves your kowtow, and you, too, should kneel, understand?" Yi Xian asked, "Senior, she is?" "Buqingcheng, Yi family, ancestral temple." Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as the crown prince will be replaced by Yi Lang. The person who spoke was an old man in a black robe. Not far behind the old man, stood a young man, a faint smile hanging on the corner of the young man's mouth. This person was Yi Lang. And on both sides were the Yi family's elders. Why? At this time, a timid voice suddenly sounded in the ancestral temple. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a trace of fear in her eyes. This little girl was called Yiling, Yi Xian's younger sister. This time, when she heard that the family wanted to dismiss Yi Xian, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. Yiling, what are you doing? The little girl called Yiling bowed to the people in the ancestral temple, and said timidly, Great Elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the crown prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason? The Great Elder looked coldly at Yiling. This is a family matter, why are you interrupting? Leave. Yiling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the Great Elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent. The Great Elder suddenly raged, whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away. At this time, the new crown prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others. The Great Elder coldly replied, then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, two Yi family's guards rushed in. Yiling clenched her fists, and said angrily, This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the family for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the family. The family is unfair to him. One of the guards glanced at the new crown prince, Yi Lang. He knew that his chance to shine had come. The guard sneered, Young Master Yi Lang inherits the title of crown prince. It's everyone's wish. What are you yelling about? As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. However, she did not cry, and only covered her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard, and smiled, What's your name? The guard quickly bowed. Subordinate Zhang Mu greets the crown prince. Yi Lang nodded, You're not bad. After I become the crown prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on. Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. I'll go through fire and water for the crown prince, and I'll do anything for you. Yi Lang nodded, Drag him away. This person is causing trouble in the ancestral hall, do not hold back. Understood. Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the killing intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this time, Zhang Mu seemed to have seen something, and he suddenly stopped. Within the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. He was wearing a tight-fitting robe that was tattered and covered in blood. This person was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from the Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's lips curled into a cold smile. Inside the ancestral hall, all the elders frowned. The Great Elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang and was about to speak. At this time, Yi Xian was like a ferocious tiger leaping in front of him. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Bang! Zhang Mu's head spun, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, "Your man?" As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, "Prince, save me." Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, her tears flowed out. "Brother, it hurts, it hurts." Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Peng! Qingcheng, Yi Clan, Ancestral Hall. Ancestors, Yi Xian has no talent, no virtue. From now on, Yi Xian's position as prince shall be replaced by Yi Lang. The one who spoke was an old man in black robes. Not far behind the old man, there was a youth with a faint smile on his face. This person was Yi Lang. On both sides, there were the elders of the Yi clan. Why? Right at this moment, a slightly timid voice suddenly resounded within the ancestral hall. Everyone turned to look and saw a little girl standing at the door. She was about 12 or 13 years old, and her hands were tightly gripping the hem of her skirt. Her face had a sickly pallor, and she looked a little weak. There was even a hint of fear in her eyes. This girl was called Yi Ling, and she was Yi Xian's younger sister. When she heard that Yi Xian was to be replaced, she disregarded her illness and rushed over. The black-robed old man frowned. "Yi Ling, what are you doing?" The little girl called Yi Ling bowed to the people in the hall, and asked timidly, "Great elder, my brother, Yi Xian, is the prince. Why did you cripple him for no reason?" The great elder looked at Yi Ling coldly. "This is a matter of the clan. What are you interrupting for? Leave." Yi Ling was clearly a little fearful. She did not dare to look the great elder in the eye, but she did not leave. Instead, she mustered up her courage and walked into the ancestral hall. She bowed to the elders on both sides of the hall and said, "Elders, my brother is currently fighting with the Li family for the mining rights of the mine in Nanshan. He is now fighting for the family, and it is unknown whether he is alive or dead. However, the family has used a groundless excuse to remove his position as the crown prince. Impudent." The great elder suddenly raged. "Whether he's stripped or not, it's not up to a little girl like you to decide. Men, drag her away." At this time, the new prince, Yi Lang, suddenly laughed. "He should be flogged 30 times as a warning to others." The great elder replied coldly, "Then flog him 30 times. Very quickly, Yi clan guards rushed in. Yi Ling clenched her fists, and said angrily, "This is unfair. My brother has risked his life for the clan for so many years, and even now, he's fighting for the clan. The clan is unfair to him." One of the guards glanced at the new prince, Yi Lang. He knew that this was his chance to shine. The guard sneered, "Young Master Yi Lang inherits the position of prince. What are you yelling about?" As he spoke, he raised his hand and slapped Yi Ling's face. Slap. A crisp slap sounded, and the right side of Yi Ling's face instantly swelled up. But she did not cry, and only held her cheek tightly. Yi Lang looked at the guard and smiled. "What's your name?" The guard quickly bowed. "This subordinate, Zhang Mu, greets the prince." Yi Lang nodded. "You're not bad. After I become the prince, I need 10 guards. You can be my guard from now on." Hearing this, Zhang Mu was overjoyed, and quickly bowed deeply. "This subordinate is willing to go through fire and water for the prince, even if it means death." Yi Lang nodded. "Drag him away. This person is disturbing the ancestral hall. Don't hold back, understand?" Zhang Mu glanced at Yi Lang, and when he saw the murderous intent in Yi Lang's eyes, he understood. He immediately grabbed Yi Ling's hair and dragged her out. At this moment, Zhang Mu suddenly stopped as if he had seen something. In the ancestral hall, everyone turned their heads to look outside. Not far from the ancestral hall, a young man was walking towards the ancestral hall. The young man was wearing a tight-fitting robe, and the robe was tattered, and there was blood everywhere. The young man was Yi Xian, who had rushed back from Nanshan. Seeing Yi Xian, Yi Lang's mouth curled into a cold smile. In the ancestral hall, the elders frowned. The great elder narrowed his eyes, and his face was dark. No one knew what he was thinking. From afar, when Yi Xian saw Zhang Mu dragging Yi Ling, his face turned savage. Who gave you the guts to touch my sister? When Zhang Mu saw Yi Xian, his face changed. He quickly looked at Yi Lang, and was about to speak. At this moment, Yi Xian leaped in front of him like a ferocious tiger. Before the latter could react, Yi Xian's fist landed on his face. Pung! Zhang Mu felt a wave of dizziness, and he stumbled and fell. Yi Lang did not stop there, and charged towards Zhang Mu again. At this time, Yi Lang suddenly roared, Yi Xian, he's my man, how dare you? Yi Xian suddenly stepped on Zhang Mu's chest. Pooh! Zhang Mu spat out a mouthful of blood. Seeing this, Yi Lang's face turned ugly, while Yi Xian lifted his head to look at him, asking savagely, your man? As he spoke, he stomped on Zhang Mu's face. Zhang Mu's face turned into a bloody mess, as he screamed, Prince, save me. Yi Xian did not care about Zhang Mu, as he walked to Yi Ling's side. Seeing Yi Ling's state, Yi Xian felt as though his heart was being sliced by a knife. He clenched his fists, and his entire body trembled. When Yi Ling saw Yi Xian, tears welled up in her eyes. Brother, it hurts, it hurts. Hearing this, Yi Xian's expression turned savage. In the next instant, he charged in front of Zhang Mu, and kicked Zhang Mu's head. Pung! Chapter 825. No way. Hearing the old man's words, the woman nodded and did not say anything else, nor did she attack. In the end, Yi Xian had to walk his own path. The old man did not attack either because he could tell that the woman was not in her true form. Since she was not in her true form, how could she stay in this world for too long? Right now, he only needed to wait for the woman to disappear. Of course, the reason why he chose to wait was because he did not have any confidence in defeating the woman. The old man took a deep look at the woman in the cloth skirt, and then quietly disappeared. The woman turned to look at the bamboo house in the distance. Her eyes flickered as memories of the past surfaced in her mind. At that moment, Yi Xian was still madly absorbing the drop of essence blood. He found that the drop of essence blood was cooperating with him and fusing into his blood. This saved him a lot of trouble. Not far away, on the green-robed man's shoulder, the little white fellow looked curiously at Yi Xian before looking at the green-robed man, her eyes filled with curiosity. The green-robed man smiled. Little fellow, what are you thinking about? The little white fellow blinked and grinned, then brought the candied fruit to the green-robed man's mouth. The green-robed man took a bite and smiled, delicious. The little fellow hugged the green-robed man's head and rubbed it intimately. At the side, the little girl licked the candied fruit and stomped her right foot lightly. She hummed a strange tune, looking very satisfied. As if thinking of something, the little girl suddenly asked, Brother, when are we going to play at Sister Lian Shuang's house? Sister Lian Shuang's house. Hearing the little girl's words, the little white fellow quickly looked at the green-robed man, her eyes filled with anticipation. The green-robed man smiled. We'll go when we're done, all right? The little girl nodded, all right. Saying this, she paused and said, Brother, Sister Lian Shuang's hometown. The green-robed man smiled and asked, What is it? The little girl said, I borrowed some money from their bank and said that I have to return it within 10 years. I've calculated it, and it's about time. The green-robed man smiled. Are you going back to return the money? The little girl tilted her head and looked at the green-robed man, her face filled with confusion. Why should I return it? I borrowed it, not snatched it. What's the point of borrowing money if you have to pay it back? The azure-robed man, the little girl added, there's also that platform. I didn't even look for them. They came to me themselves and asked if I was short of money. I said I was, so they lent it to me. Later on, they came looking for me and... At this point, she suddenly felt a little angry. These people are really bad. They borrowed 30,000 from me, and now they want me to return 500,000. I asked why, and they said it was interest. I asked them what interest was, and they said you have to pay interest when you borrow money. As she spoke, she looked at the green-robed man. Do I have to pay interest when I borrow money? The green-clothed man thought for a moment and said, have you ever thought about returning the money? The little girl blinked. In their world, if you borrow money and don't return it, you will be punished by the law. Moreover, you will be condemned morally and will be despised by others. The green-robed man asked, then why didn't you return it? The little girl was expressionless. I'm not from their world, and in theory, I'm not a human. I've checked, and their laws and morals only target humans, not other living beings. The green-robed man, the little girl, continued. I've also checked, and in their world, some living beings have a lot of special privileges, and they are even more respected than humans. For example, that bear-something cat, its bloodline is many times lower than mine, but it has a very high status in Sister Lian Shuang's hometown. Therefore, I feel that with my status and the rarity of my bloodline, my status in Sister Lian Shuang's hometown should be beyond AAA, so I should be able to borrow money and not return it. At this moment, the little white guy hurriedly pointed at herself. The little girl hurriedly nodded in agreement. And little white, brother, do you know? In Sister Lian Shuang's hometown, the air there is very, very bad, and the pollution there is very serious. Moreover, their food is not very clean. Anyway, I feel that they are quite tenacious, breathing in the harmful air, eating harmful food, and still being able to survive. It's not easy. As she spoke, she looked at Little White. After Little White went over, she even gave them a lot of spiritual chi. Now that they are in that place, it's much better. Little White's credit is very big. She should be able to borrow money and not return it. The little white guy hurriedly nodded and then raised both of her paws. She was in full agreement with the little girl's words. The green-robed man asked, why didn't you return the money you borrowed? The little girl shrugged. I spent it all. The man softly asked, what did you spend? The little girl said, a car with 4 wheels, shiny stones, a big house, and that plane. It's something that flies in the sky. As she spoke up to this point, she was a little excited. Then, she looked at the green-robed man. Brother, I bought a fighter jet, the kind that can fight, it's very powerful. The green-robed man frowned slightly. Logically speaking, these things should be very expensive, right? Hearing the green-robed man's words, the little girl hurriedly nodded, feeling a little heartache. Very expensive, very expensive. The green-robed man was a little puzzled. Then why were they willing to lend you so much money? The little girl blinked. They can't beat me, can they not lend me money? The green-robed man was speechless. The little girl said again, brother, that platform I told you about just now lent me money. After they lent me the money, they lent me 30,000. In the end, they told me that I owed them 500,000. Then, they even wanted to tell Ms. N and Ms. Lian Shuang. This made me so angry that I directly smashed their headquarters. The green-robed man said in a deep voice, did you hurt yourself? The little girl shook her head. No, after I hit them, they started to reason with me. Then, they told me that I only needed to return 30,000. The green-robed man asked, and then? The little girl said, I borrowed another 3 million. The green-robed man was speechless. At this moment, the little girl suddenly pointed at herself. Arya glanced at the little white guy and then said, it's not just me. Xiao Bai also borrowed 3 million. However, Xiao Bai couldn't bear to do it, so she left them a stick of candied hawthorn. It's a little bit of a loss. As she spoke, she shook her head and sighed softly. Actually, I still miss Sister Lian Xuan's place. There are a lot of fun things there. Moreover, you can borrow money from others, the kind that you don't have to return. But here, no one lends money to me. The green-robed man shook his head and smiled. Just as he was about to speak, Yi Xian suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes flashed with a red light. The green-robed man looked at Yi Xian. At this moment, Yi Xian stood up and clenched his fists. Boom! The space within hundreds of thousands of feet cracked. Power. The power of the bloodline. Yi Xian greedily took a deep breath. This power was really intoxicating. This was the power that the bloodline gave him. Yi Xian looked at the green-robed man. Thank you, Senior. It could be said that the drop of blood from the green-robed man had brought him an earth-shattering change. The green-robed man smiled. Remember, your bloodline has a special property, and that is, the more irrational you are, the more powerful it becomes. Therefore, don't think about controlling it. It won't hurt you, but you need to be able to control its power. This is what you need to do, not control it. Of course, unless you encounter extreme danger or have no way out, don't use this bloodline so easily. Yi Xian nodded. I understand. Before he had devoured the green-robed man's essence blood, he had already been unable to control the power of the bloodline. Now, after devouring the green-robed man's essence blood, his bloodline could be said to have undergone a qualitative change. He didn't know exactly how strong it was. In any case, he was confident that if he used his bloodline now, he could definitely kill an expert of Li Qinfeng's level. Right now, his bloodline could be said to be his strongest trump card. It was even stronger than the 6 paths of truth in the World Prison Pagoda. The green-robed man smiled slightly. I still need some time. Let's talk about the Sword Dao, or rather, Sword Domain. The Sword Domain. Yi Xian walked over to the green-robed man and said in a low voice, Senior, what exactly does the Sword Domain mean? The green-robed man smiled and said, the Sword Domain is to use the sword to form a domain of your own. To a certain extent, you're invincible within your own domain. Yi Xian was visibly moved when he heard this. It's that formidable? The green-robed man said, it isn't that simple. You have to comprehend it if you want to form a domain with the sword. As he spoke, he opened his palm, and a sword appeared there. In the next moment, a strand of mysterious energy appeared here. The Sword Domain. Yi Xian's expression instantly changed. At this moment, he felt like he'd been enveloped by a mysterious force, and he felt like the green-robed man was like a god that couldn't be defeated while being enveloped by this mysterious force. The green-robed man smiled and said, this is a domain formed with the sword. In order to do so, you can utilize your sword intent. Your sword intent is rather special, and it'll be a new type of domain if it's formed. I'm looking forward to it. Yi Xian spoke in a low voice, can I form a domain with the sword as well? The green-robed man nodded, of course. Yi Xian glanced at the green-robed man, hesitated for a moment, and then asked, Senior, you aren't in your main body right now, right? The green-robed man grinned, it isn't. We're very far away from you. Yi Xian asked, the 5th dimension? The green-robed man shook his head and smiled, it isn't. Don't think too much about it right now. Cultivate well because you'll have to face many things in the future, and it won't do if you don't possess strength. Yi Xian nodded and didn't ask any further questions. He gazed at the sword in his hand and fell into deep thought. Forming a domain with the sword. Chapter 826. What was a sword domain? Yi Xian did not understand. He did not quite understand. However, he could sense the azure-clothed man's sword domain. This sword domain had opened a new door for him. A sword domain. Yi Xian looked at the azure-clothed man, Senior, I don't know how to comprehend it. The azure-clothed man smiled, it's normal that you don't know. Don't think about asking me to teach you. Only what you comprehend yourself is yours. Comprehend it well and believe in yourself. Yi Xian fell silent. The green-clothed man continued, it's best to have someone to help you while you're alive. However, you shouldn't think of asking for help from others for everything. You shouldn't have this sort of dependence. Because most of the time, you can only rely on yourself. A man should work hard to become stronger and be someone else's support. Don't expect others to be your support. Understand? Yi Xian nodded slightly, I understand. The azure-clothed man smiled, comprehend it well. You don't have much time, so don't waste it. With that, he left with the little girl and the little white fellow. As soon as he left, a stream of information suddenly surged into Yi Xian's mind, some of the azure-clothed man's sword Dao insights. A moment later, Yi Xian sat down and began to ponder. Comprehension. While Yi Xian was comprehending, the azure-clothed man, the little girl, and the little white fellow had already arrived in a starry sky. This was an unfamiliar starry sky. After walking for a while, the azure-clothed man stopped. Not far in front of him was a black vortex, which gave off an eerie aura. Looking at this vortex, the azure-clothed man fell silent. At this moment, a voice came from within. It was not a human voice, and it was unknown what it was saying. A moment later, the azure-clothed man smiled slightly. Is it a predestined fate? After a while, the azure-clothed man turned and left. Time passed bit by bit. During this period of time, what Yi Xian did every day was to comprehend. More accurately, he was absorbing some of the azure-clothed man's sword Dao insights. It had to be said that after absorbing the azure-clothed man's sword Dao insights, he felt enlightened. The direction of his sword Dao became even clearer. Sword domain. His current goal was to cultivate a sword domain. To be precise, he had to use sword intent to assist him in forming a sword domain. As for how to do it, the green-robed man did not tell him. He had to figure it out himself. How could one use the sword to form a domain? This was a problem. The azure-robed man came to the bamboo house, and the little girl and the white fellow walked out without disturbing the azure-robed man. The azure-robed man sat cross-legged in front of the woman's portrait and did not speak for a long time. At this moment, the bamboo door suddenly opened, and the woman in the cloth skirt walked in. The green-robed man smiled. Long time no see. The woman said softly, this isn't your main body. The azure-robed man nodded. It's just an illusion that transcends space-time. The woman said in a low voice, are you going to let him live? The green-robed man said softly, he can only walk his own path. No one can help him walk it. Humans always have to experience some hardships. The woman said, you don't intend to tell him about his origins? The green-robed man shook his head. The time has not come yet. The current him is still too weak. The woman in the cloth skirt said, so you left an image here? The green-robed man nodded. He is faster than I expected, which is already not bad. Of course, it is still not enough. The woman in the cloth skirt said in a low voice, there is no one in the fourth dimension who is your opponent, right? The man smiled and did not speak. The woman in the cloth skirt said again, but I feel that you are afraid of something. The green-robed man shook his head. Some things cannot be solved by fighting. After saying this, he turned to look at Yi Xian. He is too complicated. The woman in the cloth skirt said in a low voice, his identity is not just that woman's, the green-robed man said softly, and me. Both of us dare not cut off his past. The woman in the cloth skirt was confused. Why? The green-robed man looked at the woman in the cloth skirt. Because we can't cut it off. Impossible. The woman in the cloth skirt frowned. Both of you can't cut it off. How is that possible? The green-robed man said with a smile, we are not omnipotent. Of course, if he is our enemy, we can kill him with a sword. But the problem is that he is not. So, we cannot use force against him. Even if we use force, we are not confident that we can succeed. The woman in the cloth skirt stared at the green-robed man. Who is he? The green-robed man was silent. After a while, the woman in the cloth skirt shook her head and sighed. It is complicated. The green-robed man nodded. It is very complicated. His karma cannot be solved with a sword. Otherwise, she and I would have solved it a long time ago. The woman in the cloth skirt said in a low voice, "What is she doing now?" The green-robed man said, "Blocking the karma for him." The woman in the cloth skirt looked at the green-robed man and asked, "What about you?" The green-robed man said with a smile, "I am looking for the source of the karma." The woman in the cloth skirt asked, "Have you found it?" The green-robed man said, "I have some clues." After saying this, he paused and said, "But it is more complicated." The woman in the cloth skirt asked again, "Why?" The green-robed man sighed. "It is a headache." After saying this, he looked at the woman in the cloth skirt and said, "Remember to find me." The woman in the cloth skirt fell silent. The green-robed man was about to speak. Right at this moment, he suddenly raised his head and looked towards where Yi Xian was. In the next moment, he and the woman in the cloth skirt had vanished. In the blink of an eye, both of them had appeared before Yi Xian. At this moment, a mysterious force enveloped Yi Xian's surroundings. Its range was very small, but it existed. A trace of surprise flashed in the green-robed man's eyes. "Interesting," the woman in the cloth skirt asked. "Sword domain?" The green-robed man nodded. His comprehension isn't bad. He knows how to use sword intent to build up his domain. Even though it isn't a complete sword domain, it has completed the foundation. If he comprehends it in the future, he will be able to form a sword domain. Forming a sword domain. Meanwhile, Yi Xian opened his eyes, and his face was filled with excitement. "Senior, have I succeeded?" The green-robed man shook his head. "It is only the beginning. You have only just grasped the sword domain. Moreover, the range of your sword domain is too small. You can't use it against your enemies yet. Understand?" Yi Xian smiled bitterly. "Then wouldn't it be useless?" The green-robed man smiled. "How could it be useless?" "Try activating the sword domain." Yi Xian did as he was told, and he utilized his sword intent to form a small sword domain around him. The green-robed man gazed at the woman in the cloth skirt. "Give it a try." The woman nodded. She opened her palm, and then a strand of mysterious force instantly enveloped Yi Xian. The laws of yin and yang. Yi Xian's expression changed. Because the green-robed man within his body said, "Use the sword domain." Yi Xian hurriedly utilized the sword domain. In an instant, the mysterious force within his body was instantly suppressed. Even though it hadn't vanished completely, the speed at which he aged had been reduced by more than 10 times. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he gazed at the green-robed man. "Senior," the green-robed man smiled, "this domain counters all laws in the world, and it even includes the Tao laws. Of course, if someone's strength is much greater than yours, then you won't be able to suppress them. However, it isn't to the extent of being unable to fight back." Yi Xian hurriedly nodded when he heard this. Earlier, he wasn't able to resist the woman at all. Not to mention him, even an expert at Li Qinfeng's level wasn't able to fight back before her. Yet now, the sword domain he just cultivated was capable of suppressing these laws. What did this mean? It meant that he could go against numerous experts that were much stronger than him while he possessed the sword domain. At the very least, he wouldn't be unable to fight back at all. The sword domain. What he had to do now was to fully develop this sword domain because it would become a trump card of his. Meanwhile, the green-robed man suddenly smiled. "It's time to leave." Yi Xian gazed at the green-robed man when he heard this. "Senior, where are you right now?" The green-robed man smiled. "A place that's extremely far away from you." An extremely far place. Yi Xian was just about to say something when the green-robed man suddenly said, "See you in the future." As soon as he finished speaking, he turned around to gaze at the woman and grinned, "See you in the future." The woman nodded slightly, "Take care." The green-robed man smiled, and it didn't take long for him, the little girl, and the white little fellow to gradually become ethereal. The little girl glanced at Yi Xian, and then she waved her hand, "Remember to bring more candied hawthorn next time." The white little fellow hurriedly waved its little claw to display its agreement. Yi Xian smiled, and then he hurriedly withdrew 2 candied hawthorns and passed them to the little girl and white little fellow. The white little fellow blinked, and then she waved her little claw. A fist-sized white pearl suddenly flew over to Yi Xian. Yi Xian was stunned, and he was just about to ask about it. Meanwhile, the green-robed man, the little girl, and the white little fellow had vanished completely. Only Yi Xian and the green-robed woman remained here. The woman fell silent for a short moment before she said, "It's time for me to leave as well." Yi Xian gazed at the woman and said, "Senior, if I encounter danger in the future." "No, if I head to the Nether Pavilion in the future, would I still be able to see all of you?" Looking at Yi Xian, the woman in the cotton dress said, "You have to walk your own path. Especially in the future, no one will come to help you. Don't have such thoughts of relying on others." When she spoke up to hear, she paused for a moment and said, "I'll help you one more time." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned around and vanished on the spot. Yi Xian was stunned, and then he hurriedly followed her out of the room. The woman arrived in the starry sky, and then she gazed towards the distance. In the next moment, she suddenly opened her right palm and pressed it down lightly. A moment of silence ensued. "OM." A sword howl suddenly resounded from afar, and then a ray of light tore through the sky towards them. Yi Xian's expression instantly changed when he saw this attack. It was so formidable that it seemed like it could slash the starry sky into pieces, and it was extremely shocking. Meanwhile, the woman in a cotton dress suddenly pressed down lightly with her right hand, and the ray of sword light instantly vanished without a trace. The old man from the sword sect glanced coldly at the woman, and then he turned around and vanished on the spot. He refused to fight. He knew that the woman was about to vanish. It was extremely stupid to go head-on against her right now. So long as she vanished, then Yi Xian would definitely die. The woman didn't pursue him. The old man from the sword sect wasn't weak, and she had no other choice if he refused to fight her. After all, she couldn't even be considered as a clone. The woman fell silent for a short moment, and then she gazed at Yi Xian, "Good luck." As soon as she spoke, her figure instantly became ethereal. Yi Xian was speechless. P.S. Monthly votes are still too few. I fell into deep thought and couldn't figure it out no matter how I thought about it. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.